The story begins with the fact that Zhang Dali lived in a rather expensive city, where wealthy families mostly lived and could afford living in luxurious central areas. What could not be said about a young man who, at a rather early age, was left without parents through their own fault and addiction. Now he had to eat the cheapest products and quick snacks that could be found in supermarkets. But when the guy walked along the street, an old man who was sitting at the table and traded all kinds of trinkets turned to him. Grandfather cast a serious look at Zhang and asked if he wanted to buy something from his goods, and immediately offered the utility. The guy at that moment more worried about his sandwich in his hand. So chewing, he asked the old man what the utility was. Grandfather said that it allows you to instantly increase improvement. The owner will be able to become a defender, the main mentor, to marry and become immortal. Zhang was shocked by such nonsense because he knew that at least something to achieve in this life, he needed to make a lot of effort and not just buy something incomprehensible. Therefore, the guy immediately turned around and said that he did not believe in such a lie and he could not be thrown with money. And when the old man tried to contact him again, he received a rough and short answer, because of which he was sad. But he did not want to give up so easily and decided to name the name and surname of the young man to demonstrate that he knows all the information about him. According to the old man, the guy from childhood had a large supply of energy and ate a lot. The 18th generation of his ancestors was ordinary peasants. His mother died and the father of an alcoholic. So the family is very poor. The man also talked about what he knew how recently they found a fatal disease for which he has no money for treatment. Therefore, in the end, he decided to buy a pancake and then commit suicide so as not to wait for natural and painful death. The seller knew that the guy entered the university this year, and the other day he was thrown by telephone by a girl in whom he was in love for 3 years. From what they heard from Zhang Dali, tears in his eyes came up. He could not believe that someone could really know the whole story about him. Therefore, being confused, he asked the old man where he knew all the tragic facts from his unfortunate life. The man at that moment began to smile and asked if he was really right, and all his words coincide. But by the expression on Zhang's face, one could understand that the old man still called everything correctly, and as if he had read from the sheet, suddenly the seller asked that pancake that the guy recently bought on the road still warm and fragrant, and the truth was upset by Jana, because his last snack was already cold and resembled gray porridge to taste. Suddenly, the old man grabbed a snack from the hands of a young man and said that he would immediately give him a utility in exchange for a pancake. According to him, this thing will help in an instant, increase improvement. The guy will become a great defender of the main mentor, marry and achieve immortality, and also achieve the peak of his strength. And in other words, the life of the owner of the utility should have changed a second before recognition. Being in a hopeless situation, when Zhang had nothing to lose, he agreed to the stranger's proposal. Now the guy was in anticipation of a new life and had a real hope that at least it could help him. Then the Dali's gaze changed and he seemed to be more serious, because he saw some kind of clue for the best future. It was as if he began to shine and was already ready for new obstacles in his life path for the best future. The old man also admired the shining eyes of the young man and said, "They say he sees in him a real talent and thirst for life." Then he held a pancake with one hand and the other reached out under the table at a gray bag, in which Zhang was the happiness of it. Suddenly, a man poured small wooden planks on the table, which attractively sparkled and attracted the attention of other passers-by. They seemed to be covered with gloss and removed from the cosmos, because only stars from the sky could shine like. But Dali did not cause delight. He asked the old man, did he really decide to deceive him and say that these woods could really be utilities? However, the man was confident in his words and said that the young man is now young enough to understand the whole truth. But according to his story, all these utilities were previously used by unprecedented heroes, and after the choice, Zhang will receive the body of the hero and his fate, after which he will be able to get to the very peak of strength and improvement. Suddenly, the guy's eyes lit up again and he could not believe that he would really be able to change his life so easily. Therefore, without unnecessary thoughts, he replied that he would immediately choose a wooden utility for himself and wait for positive changes. Then he grabbed the first amulet, and the old man said that the young man had a rather promising, albeit ordinary, but this was exactly what for the hero police. And the reward is quite good, since Zhang will be able to live life again and again, without any doubt. But suddenly the guy thought about the fact that if his life really was like a clean sheet, then something would hardly change. So he changed his mind. When he took up other utilities, he seemed to feel that an old grandfather would live in this body, who would seem to exist in this world. Such a young man also did not want to, because it was too risky and would have no sense for changes in life. And after that, he began to carefully examine all the remaining utilities, and suddenly his gaze fell on a brilliant piece of wood. Touching her, he felt that this was a special system that would be an ideal choice for a young guy. With the system in his hands, he will be able to own the whole world, send the need to work by itself, because the automatic system will help to achieve the peak. The old man behind the counter asked Zhang whether he thought well and was sure of his choice. After all, when he chooses the desired utility, it will be impossible to refuse, and such a fate will forever stay with him. Without unnecessary thoughts, Dali again repeated that he was choosing a system and handed the utility to the old man, confirming his choice. Poltavets noted that the system is quite popular recently. Many heroes love to use it. Who do not ask, that's it. Therefore, quickly informing all the pitfalls and leaving no choice for the guy, the old man shaved with him and gave the utility. After confirmation, he looked like a frantic sorcerer who ordered Zhang to immediately go to changes in his fate. After the last words of the man, the young man seemed to fall into the floor and found himself in a completely different dimension, which corresponded to the system. Zhang began to absorb, and he did not have time to come to his senses, as no one else could help him return to the ordinary world. In the eyes of the old man, it looked like a kind of teleport that took his next client and left him alone. After that, the old man began to rejoice and thought to himself how it was not easy for him to deceive passers by for the sake of eating pancakes. Meanwhile, Zhang seemed to be in space, where there were digital computer codes around him, of which the space consisted. It was difficult for a young man to stay on his feet, and suddenly, as if with a strong lightning, he was thrown into a completely different world. Then he suddenly appeared on the shores of the blue and clean sea, trying to linger on the sand so that the waves would not take it. Then he began to cough, as an incomprehensible liquid fell into his lungs during this journey between the worlds. Now the guy was trying to see all around with tired eyes and suddenly turned back. There he saw many beautiful girls in swimsuits who splashed each other with water and played, enjoying the moment. Zhang saw that the terrain was pretty good after using the utility, as everything around had really changed. In addition, so many naked beauties in swimsuits he had never seen that he could not but attract his attention. Suddenly he heard an unknown voice who called him a pervert because of such lustful thoughts of beauties. But when Zhang looked right under his hands, he saw there another stranger there, in whom only his face stuck out of sand. At that moment, Dali immediately removed his hands from the sand and began to make excuses that he had just fallen from the sky. The whole girl blushed and asked, was he really a criminal who really fell from the sky right among her in the middle of a sunny day? But Zhang had nothing to answer since all her words were true, although they sounded rather ridiculous for everyone who would hear it, not knowing the truth. Then the stranger gradually began to get out of the sand and said that once her aunt gave her advice, what to do when she sees a pervert. Suddenly, Zhang did not have time to come to his senses, as he saw the girl's leg, who flew right in his face at high speed. After all, Aunt told her that when meeting with a guy from whom there may be a threat, you need to immediately repulse him. In addition, the beauty raised a big noise, as she informed all the girls that there was a criminal on the beach. Her friends began to panic and collect things immediately to protect themselves from unknown evil. At that moment, they helped each other dress as soon as possible so that the man did not manage to see their naked parts of the body. Therefore, then, as if all their clothes, together with the sand, rose into the sky and flew in the air. After the blow received, Zhang immediately lost consciousness and turned off right on the beach. However, as soon as he opened his eyes, he saw those very girls who had already called him pretty. Someone even said that the handsome men are also perverted. So there are only such people who are in captivity. One of the sisters turned to the other and said that the guy had just touched the body of the mentor Jiang, and she already wants to marry him. For everyone else, it was an incomprehensible nonsense how it was fashionable to marry a pervert who allows himself such things. But after many minutes of slander, Jiang could no longer resist and said that all these words are not true, and he really did not want to do this. But the mentor Jiang remembered the pose in which the guy was above her, and what exactly he did with his own hands. And indeed, Zhang remembered that he squeezed his hands very much in the sand, but did it in order to at least get to his feet. But suddenly he remembered that before falling from heaven to the new world, he acquired a utility, namely a new system. Then he began to turn to her and call for help. But there was no one in the world of the system. Zhang did not understand why he did not see his assistant, as he was already teleported to a new area, which means that the utility really worked. This began to enjoy his beginning, because it is not clear where the system disappeared, and it turns out that the old seller from the street still deceived him. But suddenly, nevertheless, an extraneous voice appeared in the guy's head who said, "They say the owner fell into big problems, so he would die pretty soon. And with such a situation, the system will have to look for a new owner. So he does not want to become attached to this." But for Zhang, these were empty conversations and nonsense. So he wanted to use the advantages of the system as soon as possible. But while the young man tried to understand that it worked incorrectly in his utility, someone suddenly pushed him in the back. When the young man raised his head, it seemed as if he had turned into a statue, because of which he was very marked and could not move. Indeed, at that moment, a large and strong woman appeared in front of him, who turned to Chun Chen and said she castrated the coalist. The woman was called Meili Spian, and she asked her sister to move away so as not to be sprayed with blood, since the sharp knife was already prepared. But Zhang realized that he needed to act as soon as possible, so he begged a woman to stop and listen to his story. Zhang tried to talk with his system, ordering her to immediately appear, but she completely ignored him. After all, if everything was spent in vain, the guy will have to return to the old seller who deceived him and solve all issues. And suddenly, a virtual screen appeared before the young man's eyes, with the words that the owner was found. And while Meili waved a sharp knife in front of him, the system said that before recreating the binding, the owner needs to complete the first task. According to the requirements, the guy had to tell the girl ahead 10 times about her love feelings for her. Jana did not like that it was necessary to complete some kind of task when his male dignity is at risk. But only when completing the first task, Dolly will be able to start using the system and its utilities, after which the system again emphasized that the guy needs to say 10 times about his love feelings for a woman ahead of him. Zhang believed this task was insane, because given the mood the girl in front of him, he could expect death. Indeed, at that moment, behind the back of Zhui Meili, it was as if a fiery dragon appeared, which he himself said, they say, for a start, he would deprive the pervert of his instrument of crime. Then he tried to be soft and invited his sister to solve everything calmly and discuss, and not immediately use force. But she was definitely against a peaceful decision, and, having fallen aside her knife, said that she should always be afraid and obey. And as soon as the woman directed the weapon to the guy's body, he could not stand it. And referring to the task, he still said that he loves the girl. Suddenly, she stopped the knife's move and almost fell from the news herd, which gave the young man the opportunity to evade. Meili blushed and suddenly became quite shy. But despite this, she still asked what exactly Zhang told her. Then he did not shy away these words, as he believed the system and shouted loudly that he loves a girl with weapons. After Meili heard this phrase, her eyes became large, and the blood in the veins seemed to froze for a fraction of a second. He did not stop further and continued to repeat many times that he loves her, thereby as if creating a conditional arrow that fell right in the heart of a woman. But Meili suddenly began to be annoyed, because she was not used to succumbing to male feelings and listening to them. All sisters' spokes around were also shocked by what they heard, because before they had never seen such a reaction from Meili's sister. The mentor Jiang did not expect this and asked if the guy really admits his feelings. But according to another of the friends, it did not matter whether it was true or not. But the courage of Zhang deserved praise, like a real man. After all, admitting Xu Meili in love, it is much worse than to die from her hands. At some point, the woman became like a flower that bloomed after the manifestation of love for her and showed her feminine energy. But suddenly, in a second, everything changed, and her neckline became as angry as he was, not even at the beginning of the meeting with Zhang. She grabbed the knife again and swinging the guy said that she did not believe any of his words. Now Meili's gaze was like a real demon. Red eyes glowing in the dark, a sharp change in the weather, had their influence on Zhang. But he did not give up, and knew for sure that as soon as possible it was necessary to complete the task in order to activate his system. Therefore, he continued to endlessly repeat the phrase of love for Meili, after which she stopped again. The girl suddenly threw a knife and with the words about hatred of Dolly, immediately left the beach and hid from everyone. Meanwhile, a notification appeared from the system that congratulated on the implementation of the first task, which means that the new owner begins. And suddenly the guy gradually began to close his eyes and fall to the ground, as if losing consciousness. The last thing he saw was angry beauties. And the system at that moment reported that the owner had too low the level of improvement. Therefore, she needs to make her contributions. Zhang was urgently immersed in a state of deep sleep, so that the system could rather connect to his life and body. Zhang did not immediately understand what happened to him. And as it turned out, after losing consciousness, he was in bed and slept sweetly. The weather in the new world for him was extremely pleasant and mainly sunny, so this time, the rays of the sun hit the guy's eyes. He gradually began to wake up precisely from sunlight and could not quickly recover after an artificial sleep. When he already began to think that everything around was a dream, a system suddenly appeared. She reported that the binding was completed and began the official launch. Then Zhang sharply got out of bed and joyfully said that now, after all these problems, the possibilities of the utility were finally unlocked. He began to dream that the improvement would improve dramatically. He will become a defender, work as the main mentor, and, having married, will gain immortality. Then he will be able to achieve a peak in spiritual practice. And he was sure that all this was not waiting for him so far. And as soon as it seemed that life was going on for the better, unexpectedly in the chambers of the guy, someone without knocking opened the door. Zhang saw a huge man who burst into the room from his feet and was not going to stand on ceremony. Then he already wanted to start sorting out the relationship, but when he saw who this man was looking like, he was afraid to say something. As it turned out, the giant Junneng came to the room, who was the brother of sister Sun Meili, who recently escaped from the guy. The man was a strong physique and directly asked the young man, it was he who deceived his only sister and brought her to tears. Zhang tried to translate everything into a friendly conversation, so he turned to Nang, as his brother, asked what kind of sister we were talking about. At that moment, the healthy man grabbed the young man, a minute ago, who had recovered from artificial sleep, and began to shake his clothes. Then he threw the guy on the bed with the words that he was the last bastard he met in this world. After all, his sister Jun Meili and Zhang supposedly deceived her, so now dared to ask what kind of sister we're talking about. Then, in the guy's head, the voice of the system sounded, which thought, did anyone really want to provoke it while they are at the Academy of Improvement of the immortality of numerous races? Meanwhile, Dali himself tried to save his life and asked Jun Nenga to let him go and calmly talk. But according to the healthy man, everyone saw the worthlessness of the guy, which means now he will make him a disabled person. The man had already prepared his huge fists, which were with the size of the Zhang's head, but could destroy his body. Therefore, Dali mentally turned to the system, because she brought him only misfortunes and now had to immediately show some best reception so that he could end Sun. And the system said that it is acting in accordance with an equivalent exchange, which was the basic principle. Therefore, now the guy had to independently deal with the difficult situation that threatened his life. But suddenly, Shu Meili burst into the chambers, who ordered her brother to stop immediately and not to do evil. However, the big man asked his sister not to intervene. They say she knows his stubborn and combat character. At that moment, the woman's gaze changed and she said with compassionate eyes that she and Zhang were loved by each other. Then he was surprised at what he heard, since all those words about love were exclusively a task from the system, and now neo-Nazism, but really fell in love with it. Therefore, the guy tried to somehow make excuses, and importantly turning to Meili said that she did not understand him. However, the girl emphasized that he was silent and did not say anything, since her brother would soon kill him without her intervention. Zhang had no choice but to listen to these instructions in order to save his own life. After these words, Neng nevertheless stopped and began to carefully and concentrately examine the face of a guy unfamiliar to him. Zhang at that moment looked rather defenseless, as he was small in relation to the body of his brother Shun, who was doubled in size. Suddenly, the big man with all his might threw the guy and said that the next time he was kinder to his sister, a real fiery bear appeared behind him like his sister. So before he left him, Dali warned, if the guy is bad about the girl, then he will abandon him to the Demon Academy, where he will feed rats with his body. Therefore, when the man left, Meili came closer to Zhang and reported that she knew about the insincerity of his confessions to her. However, as it turned out, the guy was the first to confess to her love. She was very happy because of this, so she decided to save his life. It became pleasant to the young man that the girl was able to enter his position and did not use the physical strength of her brother against him. After all, she knew that a relative has a bad character, and if someone offends her, he would certainly kill this person. And now, in order for him to leave Zhang alone, he and Meili will have to pretend to be lovers in order to adhere to her story. And extending a hand to the young man, the girl said that the next day he would come to her hostel to pretend to be a real couple. Zhang suddenly began to scream, because he did not want to associate his fate with a woman, which he did not like a bit. But she did not respond to such and said that she would go first, and Dali should not forget to come to her hostel. Then she made an air kiss for him and emphasized that feelings develop slowly and rapidly. The kiss of Miley became like the same arrow of love, which very painfully wounded the guy's fragile heart. When he finally remained alone, he turned to the system to explain where the promised rich and beautiful girl is located. The Jiang system had the physical shape of a giant cat, which periodically showed its owner and smiled maliciously. He asked the owner to remain calm, because although the system was successfully attached, all the functions have not yet been loaded, and after activating the functions of the system, the owner will be able to quickly achieve the peak of improvement. Being very angry, Zhang could not raise his hand to the speaking animal and warned him that the last time he would believe him. But while the young man tried to deal with an imaginary cat, which no one had seen except him, someone knocked on the chambers. Then I was already scared that it could be Miley again, or her brother, who decided to put an end to his life. But as it turned out, it was a mentor Jiang, who decided to visit the guy and in a playful uniform called him a perverted group. Jiang carefully stood up to say hello and asked him to call that anymore. Besides, now he felt bad, and also emphasized that he was not a pervert. Just last day a misunderstanding occurred and seemed to be framed. Therefore, so that he would not be called that anymore, he named his full name and bowed to the girl. She laughed at him a little more, but still apologized for her jokes and again called the new classmate. Then she greeted numerous species of races into the United Island country. It was difficult for Jiang to understand what an island state was, so he asked the mentor Jiang what she was talking about. After all, to accept the fact that the land on which it is now is located is an island country was quite unusual. That Jiang said that the state consists of a large number of small islands. There is the United Academy of Improving Many Numerous Races. The guy did not understand some words again, so he asked for regarding the Academy of Improvement, but the mentor decided not to waste time on explanations and said that the young man would understand everything from her own experience. In the meantime, the girl decided to show everything that the new traveler in space saw everything with her own eyes. After which they went together on a small tour of the island, where the locals looked like heroes from fictional fairy tales. Many of them trained right in the middle of the street, and someone studied new combat receptions, training with each other. All students owned their special techniques, magic and strength. So the city was like all the time in fireworks and explosions. Looking at everything with his own eyes, Zhang realized that he really got to the Academy of Self-Improvement. Then the mentor said that this part of the Academy of Self-Improvement belongs to the human race. Or, in other words, one of the camps of the Academy of Improvement and the achievement of immortality of many numerous races. Also on this island there was a campus of people, and on the rest of the students of other races lived. Jiang turned to Dali and asked if she realized correctly that he was a new student who had just acted. The guy did not know what to answer, he was confused. So he decided to play along and said that apparently the girl was right. Suddenly the young man remembered the old man from the street who sold him this system and as if specially did it, so that the young man would become a student. But before sending the young man to the academy, the mentor asked if he registered in the official system. Then Zhang was confused again, since I had never heard of registration anywhere, since this information was not mentioned anywhere. The mentor was surprised how this could not know about registration, so the person who brought him here is too irresponsible. But despite the fact that the girl still considered the guy a pervert, but she knew that in the future he would become her classmate. And that moment they gave and could not think that he would have to study together in the same class with such a beauty. Meanwhile, Jiang, in order to help the guy, pulled his hand to the restaurant's place so that he would not lose his chance of training. Soon, they were together in a huge square where there were many students and outstanding personalities everywhere. The director Sun Taojian himself was also present. According to him this year, new students are extremely talented and qualified, which can be concluded that the Academy of the Human Race is flourishing, and his deputy Li Sanyans agreed, because the past years they had terrible students, even various scums met. But this time such individuals were not noticed, which could not but rejoice the administration of the Academy of Improvement. According to Deputy, she had high hopes for new students. They can go down in history as the most powerful representatives of the human race. The director completely agreed with each word, but for some reason all the time paid attention to his watch. After a matter of minutes, he got up from the table and said that the registration time came out and it was over, so you can end it. But suddenly a mentor Jiang, who turned to the director's son and his deputy Liu, came running. She said that one student needs to urgently register, since he did not know about this procedure. The guys around were surprised when they saw Jiang Zunshin, who was unknown for what reason had to personally bring someone to the registration. They knew that this is a young mentor entering the top 10 best freshmen. Besides, she is the only woman among them. Therefore, in accordance with the status of a girl, the person whom she brought should be a real genius. People around them also began to discuss this situation and did not know how to make sure that the new one would immediately fall into the top 3. Director's son, of course, wanted to go home earlier, but he was glad to another student who apparently had to really be a talented genius. Therefore, the old man turned to the guy and said that he would go through the test as soon as possible and demonstrate his abilities. Zhang uncertainly walked to the administration table and did not know what exactly he would need to do now. But the thoughts that he had high hopes could not help but motivate, because of which he felt better. The deputy Liu knew that Jiang Zuncheng was incredibly talented and she had good prospects. So the person whom she brought should also be quite capable. From the compliments and hopes heard regarding his person, the guy seemed to be in the clouds and dreams of the best future. He was unexpectedly pleased to hear that at least someone in this life can believe so much in his capabilities as even his parents did not do. It was difficult for him to believe that he was actually so wonderful. Then perhaps even he himself did not notice this before. Director's son asked the young man first to introduce himself to be recorded in a journal of students. After that, the guy needed to put his hand on the test device. Then the stone stele itself would show the level of its improvement. Zhang Dali confidently named his name and began to pull his hands out of his pockets, which was his old habit, so that the limbs did not freeze. The director drew attention to the beautiful name and said that in front of the guy was a guy named Van Lin. He had just reached the 7th level of unification of spirits, and also was a rather famous Xiaoyang, who already had the 8th level of unification of spirits. In addition, the extremely talented Fan came, which, in comparison with others, was already able to reach the 9th level of the unification of spirits. And since Zhang was sure that fate itself chose him, he knew that he, like his predecessors, would not let him down. Therefore, they gave it quickly and confidently put his hand on a special device to find out the level of his strength. And while he was waiting for the results, the blood in his veins seemed to freeze in anticipation of some miracle in the future. But suddenly, strange things began to happen with a stone stele, as if she vibrated all the time and now she could explode. The guys around began to grieve such a strange phenomenon that no one had met before when registering. But they were sure that this happened because of a brand new unique, which was not so simple. Now, in the eyes of others, Zhang was worthy that Jiang brought him, because they say that at birth she had 12 mobile and unknown holes in her heart. So she is very clear in her elections. Suddenly, an unfamiliar portal for everyone began to form in a stone ceiling, which attracted to go inside. Exactly at that moment, an answer appeared on the ceiling, which everyone had been waiting for the last few minutes to find out the result. The guys were shocked when they saw that the new one was actually a 0 level of self-improvement. Now everyone realized that the new one actually an ordinary person and just woke up. So, apparently, he is the largest undead student in the history of the Academy of many races. At that moment, the director's son held out Zhang Schwabra in his hands and told him to hold her. The guy was considered why he had this instrument, and did not want to take a mop in his hands without explanation from the director. But the old man said that since the guy has a 0 level, he can go into the camps of the human race of the Academy of many numerous species, but only to the cleaning class. However, if Jiang manages to raise his level of improvement, then he will be able to get into a higher class. It was difficult for a young man to accept the fact that now he would be the worst among all current students and will study in the cleaning class. Now it was incomprehensible. He got to the Academy of Achieving Immortality, or nevertheless at the Lanxian College, in which he had already studied. But suddenly the system appeared and congratulated on the official entry into the Academy and the beginning of its path to achieving immortality. After that, this systemic cat tensed and ordered to open the panel of possible attributes for the new owner. At that moment, a real board opened in front of Zhang, on which so far it gave an error. In addition, in all information about him, the level of power was the 3rd, 0 speed, 0 protection, and also 0 witchcraft. Then he seemed to watch something magical in front of his own eyes, and it was difficult for him to believe that it was reality. But seeing that his strength corresponds to the 3rd level, he began to laugh. They say, in fact, the stone stele was mistaken with his results. In addition, the utility was successfully unlocked and it can begin its way to the peak of immortality. Suddenly, the system began to mock again, and the cat ordered that the owner sovereign a white bunny publicly. For based on the indicators of the public, thanks to singing, the owner will be able to increase the perfection of the collection of spirits from the 1st to the 4th level. Zhang did not understand if he would really have to sing that very widespread divine comedy, which is popular in children from 1 to 3 years old. But everyone present was already in 20 years, and this song did not fit into this environment. Then the director's son asked the young man not to be upset, because the difference between the classes is small, despite the fact that the guy is inconspicuous and the student, and he still managed to crank up something original in this place. And his future is still brilliant and complete hopes, so the United Academy hopes for him. Zhang Dali was very upset, because he did not want to build the path to improvement for a long time, especially starting with the laundry class. Then he turned to the teacher and said that he wanted to sing a song, thereby expressing his excitement at the moment. The old man himself was surprised, since before none of the students offered him songs in his personal performance. It was not clear to him what kind of song and excitement was talking about, but it was worth trying to give a chance to the student. Therefore, the director was sure that he touched the guy's words since he leaned to sing for him. This spoke of talent. Then the director's son ordered everyone to make the silence, as Zhang wants to perform a song to them and should listen to it. Some of the students present were surprised, and someone was even glad of such an unexpected concert among white days. And that moment Zhang took up the mop, imitating a large microphone with it, and tried to knead the vocal cords. One guy among the crowd began to support Dolly with the words that he loves pop songs and is ready to enjoy. One of the teachers remembered that when his student went to the outside world last time, he asked him to sing Zhao Zegun Je Lunya. And the fact that Zhang Dali knows how to sing was for many a good skill, given that the guy is at the 0 level. The mentor Jiang also did not go about her business to support a new friend in his initiative of singing, and suddenly, Zhang began a song about a small white bunny, which was covered with soft fur, and 2 small ears peeped from behind his head. Despite the rather cute text, people wanted to close their ears as soon as possible, since Zhang's voice was quite unpleasant. He was unable to reassure or vice versa to motivate everyone present with his song. Everyone was very annoyed. Even the same mentor Jiang, who until the last believed in the guy, was disappointed with such a public shame. And suddenly the system appeared and reported that the vocal performance index is evaluated at the golden stars, and the improvement of the collection of perfumes was increased to the 1st level. And now the new owner of the system has received 2 skills. Zhang thought about the fact that in fact everything was not as bad as it could be. The level of improvement has increased. The old man Qi will be shocked to death. But Dolly did not stop and continued to sing about how the white bunny loved, 8 carrots, jumped, and suddenly met his love. People, on the contrary, covered their ears with their hands and waited for this terrible concert to finally end to relax. But suddenly Zhang again had a system, known about the vocal performance index, which was now evaluated at 4 stars. Now the improvement of the collection of perfumes was increased to the 2nd level, due to which he was supplemented by 2 more points. But he continued to sing about the love of a rabbit without stopping, who suddenly died, like a homeless dog. After that, 2 ears rose again at the white bunny. Now, not only vocals but also the lyrics of the song was so terrible that it was disgusting to listen to such stories. Suddenly, one of the students thought that the new classmate was trying to conjure, and because of this, making such terrible sounds. But in the end, in the campus of the human race, there was never an outstanding talent that is at the 0 level of gathering spirits. So this comforted some. Suddenly, a magic cat appeared again, reporting an assessment of the vocal performance index in 5 stars. The improvement of the collection of spirits is increased to the 3rd level, and Zhang received 2 more skills. And Dali himself told students that they would once still wave their hands in front of him, but for now, it's worth it to sing along. Then he returned to the director's son and the deputy Liu, who offered to relax and jump a little. At that moment, the director almost lost consciousness due to such failure and shame in his entire career. Now Zhang has become the worst student of the academy. Suddenly, behind the young man's back, smoke formed, which remained after each of his steps along the stage. Now the Sting felt that after improving the collection of perfumes to the 3rd level, the first step towards the achievement of immortality was taken. And now, when he nevertheless reached the 3rd level, it is worth trying to check how much better he has become. Therefore, he went to the nearest large tree, and with all his might waved his fist with a loud cry. During the strike, he hoped to see how a huge tree would fall after his touch. But as it turned out, the guy began to jump from pain in his hand. As it turned out that absolutely nothing happened to the tree. The limb blushed, and Zhang turned to the system and asked if his 3rd level is not real. Indeed, despite the achievements, he could not even hit a tree without unnecessary pain for himself. At the same moment, the system appeared and greeted that the improvement reflects only changes in the quantity and quality of spiritual energy in the body. Therefore, if Zhang really wants to harm someone, for this it is worth studying the appropriate movements and special techniques. And for this, you need to increase the skills. At the moment, Dali had only 6 points, and it is worth clicking on the scoreboard and then improve the selected skill. Then Zhang looked at the table that appeared in front of him, where all the indicators were 0, except for force. Now the guy realized that he should improve everything with his own hand. And above all, a lack of strength should be eliminated. He looked at his muscles that could look better, but in his eyes they were still perfect. But Dali did not want someone to mock him as much as once in childhood. Zhang remembered how once in childhood he accidentally broke the toy of one girl, who immediately demanded money for loss and tears. The mother of the baby covered the guy and said that he should control his every movement, given his strength. When it was 11, his peers discussed the fact that the young man again went to help raise the table. Like, he himself was to blame for the fact that it was so strong. Rumors went that the teachers could not stand it because of this. When the guy was 18, the director decided to talk with him, who noticed that he had average grades and the problem is not this, but in the great power of Zhang. Therefore, given his feature, the woman invited the student to finish her studies and go to her uncle to work. Dali took everything from Dali. Only a beloved girl remained, who had always been nearby and supported. But at the most difficult turning point of his life, she invited him to cut off his relationship. At that moment, Zhang was already 22 years old and he sincerely could not understand why the girl reacted to him. After all, for her sake he got a job at the factory to provide the life of both. But she decided not to hide the truth and explained that it was possible that the problem is in his strength, which is transmitted to the muscles, but in the head of the guy a mess. Therefore, the girl did not feel even a gram of romance in his actions. Therefore, now it seemed to the beloved that a man could not give her the love and feelings that she would like to see. After Zhang remembered all the painful moments from his past life, it was as if he could find enough strength to start something new. He knew that for improvement he needed to find magic and stay away from his past. Only in this way he would be able to attract the attention of girls to whom he could give true love. After all, no one loves all those who have only physical strength. Zhang could not afford to repeat mistakes from a past life. Therefore, he began to consider the panel with his achievements and chose where to start the improvement. After a little thought, he chose the improvement of magic, which was something unknown to the guy, which means interesting. He wanted to look at the possible result as soon as possible from the opportunity to control the power of magic. Therefore, Dali pressed on a plusk so that thanks to this increased strength but no sudden changes at that moment occurred. Therefore, the guy immediately turned to the system and asked what exactly was the matter, why he could not increase his magic. At that moment, a system cat appeared and explained that according to investigations, the system is not yet adapted to the body, so the attributes panel cannot be activated to the end. But so far there are problems with increasing skills, so it is still impossible to add glasses to the attribute of magic. After what he heard, Zhang was very angry because he could not believe that the system was still not adapted to him. The guy knew that he could not rely on a system cat who seemed to mock him all the time. But after the manifestation of emotions, the system appeared again and reported that the strength on the owner's body is too high, so only force can be increased on the attributes panel. It was not clear to Zhang why now, thanks to such a well-known system, he could increase what he already has. It hurts that such a tragic life will happen again in this world, given that he is at the Academy of Improvement. Soon, the guy went to the United Academy of Improving numerous races, namely to the human dormitory. Then Zhang began to accept the fact that it is still better than not getting anything from the system. In addition to strength, he had nothing to choose. So making a heavy exhalation, Jolly extended his hand to the display to increase this adaptation. Having no desire to agree with reality, he had no choice but to accept it. And just one moment after a slight touch to the screen, the level of power increased 3 times and was 9. Having finished, Zhao decided to walk along a large hostel for the human race, where he will now have to live. The guy suspected that he would not live alone, so he decided to knock into the room to warn his neighbor about his arrival. But as soon as Zhang touched the door again, she suddenly opened and his face immediately changed. When Zhang entered the room, he saw an adult man who resembled his father and was just as untidy. As soon as the guy greeted him, the man was dissatisfied with this meeting and answered him quite rather, "I did not think further that in this world there could be such bad people who would not even dress when meeting a new person." But the man took everything the other way around. They say Zhang, a pervert who was not taught to manners, and he burst into other people's rooms. Then he was frightened and tried to explain that he was knocking on the room, but the doors were quite shaky and opened themselves. Then the guy realized that the next time he should be careful, because now it was difficult to control the power after he put additional glasses into it. And while he was thinking about further actions and warnings, the man asked why the young man came to his chambers. Zhang completely forgot to introduce himself, so he immediately corrected this and said that he was a new student from the cleaning class. After these words, the stranger immediately took up his clothes, rushed into the restroom, and said that Zhang waited for him in the room. In less than a minute, he returned in his official student clothing and was no longer as angry as at the first moment of the meeting. The man kindly shook his hand Dolly and, calling him a new classmate, said he was glad to meet. Then the guy laughed inconveniently because he was not ready that he would be called his classmate so quickly. It was even difficult for him to accept the fact that he would study in the same class along with this person. Then the eldest decided to introduce himself and called himself Gilbert Eberhard, but allowed him to call Bert. He himself admitted that he was a little older than the guy. Zhang suspected that his new neighbor was not a peer, but thought that these were only external factors that were not true. It was a little inconvenient for him to ask about this, but nevertheless he decided and asked how the gear was in the first grade, given his age. The man laughed at this issue and said that there was nothing complicated. He just stayed 20 times for the first year. At that moment, Zhang nearly fell. It was not clear to him how to learn so badly that for 20 years in a row, not to go beyond the first class. But to find the pluses, he asked Berta, "Does this not indicate that he has more life experience than some teachers?" The husband laughed and said that Zhang was right, since for 20 years he managed to see a lot. In addition, most new teachers when arranging the academy ask him about how everything works. But Bert decided that he would have enough time to talk and called for Dolly to go to the first lesson, which was about to begin. The hostel was quite close to the Academy of Improvement itself, so only a few minutes later the men were in the training class. When Zhang was inside the audience, he exhaled with calm. After all, he was afraid that the lessons of the laundry class would be held in the pantry. But to his surprise, everything was not so bad as to be upset because of the class in which he was due to a low level of strength. Bert invited the newcomer to sit next to him and said that in the end, their class is official at the academy. Even though the worst students are sent there, and also because of their specialty, they are an answer for the lapping of the entire territory. But soon the conversation was interrupted and there was complete silence in the class, as the teacher came, who greeted everyone at the Academy of Improvement of the immortality of numerous races. As it turned out, it was a class teacher named Shane Lynch, who immediately asked for a little attention to his words. But while all the students were at least a little attentive, Gilbert unceremoniously lay down on his desk and dozed off. Then the teacher ordered him to immediately sit straight and behave like all students, not allowing too much. But Bert was dissatisfied with the cries of the class teacher, and with a tired face asked him not to touch. Then Mr. Sheen could not stand it, and screamed the student to immediately get up and think about how he was talking with his class teacher. Then Gilbert reminded Lynch that he was 10 years less than him at the academy, recalling the moment Bert stood up for him. Therefore, being now angry, he asked the teacher, "Does he really want him to get up and listen to his orders?" At that moment, the teacher became inconvenient, so he did not even know what to answer and he was shy to continue to speak in such a tone. Therefore, he asked Gilbert to forget this situation, because there is nothing to be done with people like him, so it makes no sense to waste his time. Meanwhile, Zhang turned to his neighbor and said that he was so cool when even teachers are afraid of him. Bert laughed and said that all these 20 years he was not just at the academy and did not want to end it. He was sure that everyone respects him here, so he could calmly fight his whole life and teach new ones. Meanwhile, Mr. Sheen turned to the class and noted that among those present there are both old students and new ones. There were more the latter. All of them had no talent, skills, were rather poor and poorly educated people in society. According to the teacher's words, they were all rather stupid and indecisive if you compare them with other students in classes. Therefore, Lynch asked the disciples, do they are satisfied with such a prospect and whether they want to try to do something to achieve something more? One of the students asked if there are those who are much more talented than them and are more persistent in their studies. Then why should they strain at all? These words became a painful arrow in the soul of Mr. Shane, who, on the contrary, wanted to hear the motivation from students after his speech. For a minute he was confused but asked if one of those present could give an answer. Why should they carefully study? But none of the students could give an answer, since basically they were not used to thinking about the questions that they hear from teachers. Silence led the class teacher out of balance. All his life he wanted to transmit knowledge, but in this case, there was no one to transfer them. Therefore, in order to at least somehow attract students, he said that the one who would give him an answer would be released from training within 10 days. But the problem was that even Sheen himself could not give himself an answer to his own question. But suddenly, among the long silence, Zhang raised his hand, who said that he could try to express his opinion. I thought that they needed to study in order to understand how powerful they are in comparison with others. The teacher did not expect such an answer from the new student and was pleasantly shocked by such thoughts on the question. At that moment, Bert praised his new neighbor and said that he was rather smart among all those present in the classroom. And in his opinion, thanks to those who once dropped it to the ground, it is now convenient for him to lie and rest on it. Another student added that success does not always come with hard work. But without hard work, you can always relax. And if you try to achieve something, then you can ruin something. These students were such a philosophy. From each of these answers, the teacher's heart seemed to stop for a minute, and blood froze in his veins. He had nothing to answer, since he planned to really give all his best to try to change these people. However, they thought in a completely different way, because of which the class teacher could not stand it and informed the class that they were dissolved. After that, in the shopping, all for his prepared materials and ran as far as possible from such students. The teacher was sure that the laundry class was no longer helping. It is foolish to continue to try to invest at least something in their empty heads. And when a break began and the students parted, Zhang asked Bert if he knew that healthy man named Shun Nen. Yes, of course, a person was familiar with the genius of the academy. But his behavior was not the best and the character is terrible. And also talked about his younger sister, Shun Meili. In appearance, she resembled a bear. For 3 years in a row was considered the most terrible girl of the academy. But Nen loves his sister and is ready to end anyone who offends the girl. As it turned out, once he broke his legs to the new one who laughed at her. As a result, the poor is still lame. At that moment, Zhang almost choked, because he understood what position he might be, and well that the girl intervened in time. And Bert continued and said that it was better for them not to be angry with Shun Meili and not Jiang Zunchen, whom everyone is so afraid of. Zhang continued to pretend as if he knew nothing about Sun's family, so he asked if Nan is so strong. He was wondering how large the gap between his third level of gathering spirits and the level of strength of the healthy man. At that moment, Beer laughed and said that this is exactly this too big. After all, almost 2,000 such as Dolly will not have enough forces. Suddenly, the guy realized that he would still have to participate in Miley's plan and pretend her boyfriend. The end of the day came soon and it darkened on the street. And Zhang wandered around in search of a female dormitory where he was invited. Having stepped closer to one of the buildings, they gave me read that this is still a female hostel, and he was not mistaken. The young man hesitated for a long time whether he had to go into the room of Miley, but still began to carefully knock on a huge door. But no one answered, and Zhang could not believe it. Miley told him that she would wait for him to play the scene in front of Nan. But when he tried to open the door on his own. He again did not calculate the strength and broke the slit pen. It began to annoy him that after receiving additional points, he always needs to control the force that he applies to domestic objects. But to find Miley as soon as possible, the guy decided to walk a little along the corridor and look into other rooms. Suddenly, finding himself on the corner of the corridor, he saw someone, and this could not affect his emotional state. As it turned out, Zhang began to stare at one stranger who took baths, and at that moment in the towel itself. Then he blushed from what he saw and was frightened that he was not Miley, with whom he agreed to meet. Suddenly, the girl said that she was too hot, which means that the best idea would be to take a towel so far. And since she had just left the shower, there was no clothing on her, in addition to the very towel on her body. Suddenly, Zhang was very scared and realized that he needed to immediately leave this place in order not to get into trouble due to contemplation for a stranger. Without controlling his movements and strength due to stress, Zhang touched a large vase behind him and, as a result, broke it. And with a loud blow, it scattered into small particles that scattered in the corridor. Meanwhile, the girl thought that her neighbor had returned, so she decided to throw a towel again onto her body. Since the girl was sure that her friend came, she called her to go into the room and rather tell everything. But Zhang knew that he was mistaken in the room and could now run into great troubles, which he had already enough in this world. He knew that it was urgent to leave this place because then he would tire of explaining to everyone that he had not come here on purpose. But suddenly the girl ordered the guest to go and massage her shoulders as soon as possible because she was waiting for this moment all day. Zhang did not know what to do, so he stood in a cold sweat and worried about the correctness of his choice. He thought to go while there is an opportunity for it, or still stay and do what the girl was asking him. She could not suspect that now in her room was an unfamiliar man, not her friend. Dolly still could not resist the female spells, and as if under hypnosis, he obeyed the order of the girl. She asked to do massage as strongly as possible, since her muscles are very sick after the last training, which means it is worth it to try. After which, Zhang nevertheless carefully touched her shoulders and tried not to show his real power, which he controlled all the time. His movements were slow and careful, as the girl's shoulders looked rather fragile and Zhang did not want to harm. Meanwhile, the stranger really enjoyed this process, because she felt that these hands are much stronger and the massage is better. But at some point, she noticed that the skin on the hands of the masseuse became rude, although earlier she repeatedly told her about leaving herself and moisturizing. Meanwhile, several courageous men in their official clothing corresponding to the academy arrived in the hostel where it all happened. One of them said that this is the house where the first beauty lives among the new ones, who had already managed to become a mentor named Jiang Xinchen. After all, the person whom they spent was the one who saw Jiang a month ago and fell in love with her at first sight. But after that, he went in search of and hunting for a monster of stardust, so he had to leave the beauty. However then, he decided to use the core of this monster, filled with his vital force, to prepare a special potion. The man was worried about whether the result of his work would like his beloved girl. As it turned out, his name was Edgar Lodar. The servant who helped him find the mentor tried to support the man and assured him that everything would work out. He was sure that Lady Jiang would like it because Edgar put all his heart into this project. In addition, he was a rather gallant man and one of the special talents in the campus of the Academy of Improvement. After a few more encouraging phrases from the servant, Edgar felt more confident and was ready to take the first step. Meanwhile, Miley approached the hostel with her brother, who tried to dissuade him to go to the women's house at such a later time. But Nan was seriously configured and said that he did not see anything obscene in this if Jiang said he loved her. That is why the big man wanted to make sure that the guy would come. And if this does not happen, then he will tear his legs. Then Miley saw Edgar and asked if the man again came to his beloved mentor, Jiang. The man confirmed this theory and pointing to the box said that he wants to give something to the girl as recognition. Then Nan intervened and said that he was still on Edgar's plans, because it was a female dormitory and should not go here at night. At that moment, the man almost exploded from such a comment in his address, but did not want to enter into a polemic. Therefore, he calmly asked why Suna can come to this place at such a time, and he forbids him. And without receiving an answer, he immediately said that he would also not pull until the morning and pass to his beloved girl. Meanwhile, in the hostel, Jiang continued to massage a girl who did not immediately recognize in the face because of the keratatic mask. However, with Yu to Jiang, I was sure that Meili had returned to her and asked her to hold in her arms for a while. At that moment, the mentor wanted warm hugs, which she lacked so much, so not seeing who in front of her, she herself went to it. Then, Jiang himself did not notice how his hand carefully walked around the narrow waist of a fragile girl, as if it was there to her place. And Jiang herself felt as if Meili had grown a little, since it became more difficult for her to climb into her arms this time. Suddenly, Jiang heard that the door to the room without a knock was slowly opening and realized that he had trapped. He had nothing to do, since at that moment he had an almost naked girl in his arms, to whom Edgar came to admit his feelings. The man was shocked by what he saw. He hoped that the mentor was able to wait for him and remained lonely. And now it turns out that he in vain has made so much effort to catch a terrible monster and get its core for the girl. But Zhang at that moment was even worse. The guy understood that now he would end, since the guests were his real enemies in this world. However, Zhang herself did not pay attention to those who came and turned to Miley, instead of which he was actually Dolly, asked why she stopped. Then the guy already imagined what the same Junnan would do with him who came to see his feelings for his sister. But the big man immediately realized that something was wrong and asked what this young couple here allows themselves to do. When Jiang heard Nan's voice, she finally decided to remove the cucumber circles from the eyes and see what exactly happened. After what she saw, the mentor immediately jumped off the guy's hands and screamed with a cry that he forgot in her room. Jiang immediately tried to calm everyone present and explain that he was just trying to help the lady when she asked about it. But Nan was not going to listen to empty chatter and asked if the guy was going to the left at the time when he already has a girlfriend, namely Miley, whom the big man called a little sister. Then he almost cried with fear and tried to explain that he did not do anything illegal in relation to his new girlfriend. But it was no longer stopping. A real monster woke up in him who said, "They say he would not forgive this." With all his might, he hit the door, which in a fraction of a second flew to the side and ordered Jang to remember his words. But this case also concerned Edgar, who turned to Junshu and said that he was also one of the geniuses of the academy, to which she seemed to betray. But then all the attention again switched to Jang, and an angry man asked how the young man allowed himself to steal his woman. Therefore, throwing his gift away, he was seriously configured and called the guy to the duel. At that moment, Dolly managed to catch the box that Edgar rushed into him so as not to break the contents of the gift. And the man himself, along with his servants, turned confidently and said that he was leaving. But he would remember this evening. Meanwhile, soon Miley began to cry through the room and said that Jang changed her on her first day. And the mentor herself was not happy with what had happened. And reminding her first opinion of the guy, she was convinced that he was a pervert. But Jang was difficult to accept the fact that he again drove into the even worse situation from those that were in the beginning. After such an emotionally colored evening, Jang decided that it would be best to return home and relax in silence. But when the guy entered the hostel's room, Gilbert was waiting for him there, who at that time later sat down to dinner. The man noticed that his new neighbor did not return empty-handed, but with a large and beautifully decorated box. Bert asked Jang what he brought, and suspected that it could be expensive wine as a welcome gesture on the first evening of the settlement. Dolly himself had no idea what exactly he brought to his house, but decided that he would not be so scared to look inside with Bert. But first, the men came together that it was still good wine, and the mustache will be able to relax together, drinking a bottle for two. Inside the box there was deep dishes, from high-quality material, and inside there was some kind of liquid. It was her Bert, who took for wine and poured into glasses. After that, the man was the first to try an alcoholic drink, which differed in color from ordinary wine. But despite this, the man noticed that he had never drank a more delicious drink and wants to try more. Jang at that moment was in despair, but he tried to accept what happened. Indeed, in the worst case, he will simply be expelled from the academy. The guy decided to try what he brought, and as it turned out, the taste was really refined. Suddenly, the system appeared and reported that the owner killed the potion from the core of a highly monster and reached the 4th level of fee collection. Then Jang was delighted that he managed to get a bonus from the drink, which he already received from Edgar for free. Therefore, realizing that the drink could bring only good, the guy took up the dishes and decided to pour a little more potion. At the same moment, a notification of the system came again with the words of congratulations for the use of the potion from the monster nucleus and the achievement of the 5th level of the collection of spirits. From the results obtained, Jang decided that it was necessary to earn as much as possible from this potion and decided to drink it all, right from the throat. Meanwhile, Edgar himself and his servant company came to the male dormitory, where their young enemy lived just. One of the men asked Edgar if he really wants to provide a lesson to the guy right now, since competitions are prohibited in residential areas. But the man was not going to fight now. He just remembered the very pot with the potion that threw Jang in a fit of emotions, and he had to spend 2 weeks in the Sea of Stardust to catch the same flying spiritual fish, after which he prepared a potion from the core for another week. It was extremely useful for development, so Edgar had to return it as soon as possible for his own purposes. Meanwhile, the Jang system congratulated him on the next infusion of the core potion and an increase in the level of gathering for spirits. The guy especially liked that you can simply drink the desired liquid, quickly increase your levels. Suddenly, an angry Edgar burst into the room, who quickly opened the door as if tearing it off the wall. But the man's face at the moment changed when he saw what was happening inside the hostel, where Jang was. A fat man was sitting in the room, and Dolly, who was very pouted by Livet due to a large amount of drunk, a pot from which lay an empty and inverted on the table. Edgar was most worried about his trophy, which he earned for so long, and now someone unceremoniously drank him. The man grabbed the empty pot and went to Jang, asked if he had really drank all the contents in one evening. But the guy smiled and reminded Edgar how he threw the same pot in his hands, so the young man thought that no one needed this thing anymore. From the he heard, the man began to shed tears that flowed right into this pot from under the precious potion. Then he could not stand it and cursed Jang, adding that he calls him to a terrible duel to death. It will take place in 3 days, and if they gave me afraid to face a man to face it, then he can independently dismiss the academy. After the words about the duel, Edgar quickly turned around and, restraining emotions, wanted to go to his servants who were waiting outside. But suddenly Jang stopped the man, and he, from the surprise of this, already shuddered noticeably. Without a desire to speak with such a villain who took his future wife and delivered from the potion, nevertheless stopped. At that moment, Dolly asked the man if he accidentally had the same magical potion as it was in a pot. After all, in fact, the guy knew when he would be able to drink a lot of such a liquid. Then he would not be afraid of duets. But such impudence became the limit for Edgar. And now he could not restrain himself and wanted to hit the guy as much as possible. What he was going to do now? Turning around, he applied the power of fire and directed his fist towards the enemy. Zhang would not have had time to evade. He only pressed his eyes so as not to see how the moment of the blow to the best student of the academy would happen. But suddenly Bert appeared nearby, who took out the phone and, directing the camera to what was happening, immediately began to shoot. And when Edgar asked why he was doing this, he explained that fights were prohibited in residential areas and violators are punished by sending for fishing. Therefore, he shot everything for evidence. After that, Edgar immediately stopped, and Gilbert asked him to continue in order to make himself worse. But the man did not want punishment and ordered the fat man to delete all the photos that he managed to take at the time of the assassination. But Bert had his own conditions, and he said that one remote iota is worth one spiritual stone, and he managed to take 3 photos. In addition, he added that he accepts payment both in cash and with a card. Edgar did not want to endure such blackmail, so he immediately waved to the big man and said that it would be his payment. But unexpectedly for him, Zhang also took out the phone and, turning on the camera, began to photograph the illegal actions of the student. Edgar did not expect that his enemy would be capable of this, so he ordered him to immediately stop and remove the camera. But in response to this, Zhang said that now he also has 3 pictures for the removal of which he will ask for 3 spiritual stones. Bert supported the act of his neighbor and said that he quickly learns to survive in this material world. Zhang thanked the man and said that he was studying only with the best, which served as a compliment for a neighbor. After that, Bert turned to Edgar and asked if he understands the shipping for fishing for him. But if he pays 6 spiritual stones, then all the photos will be deleted and there will be no punishment. Now the man had no choice. He immediately went outside and, turning to his servants, ordered them to give spiritual stones. Then he returned to Zhang and emphasized that he would wait for him in 3 days for a decisive duel. Then the man left, and the joyful neighbors had a whole bag of small treasures to improve their level of development. But now Zhang was worried about what level of development his opponent will have on a deadly duel. Bert said that with the slightest degree, the 3rd level of blood hardening, for a new one, like Dolly, nothing shines in such a duel. Therefore, looking at his neighbor, the man confidently said that now he has big problems because of his affairs. At that moment, the guy thought about what the hardening of blood is when he himself is still at the level of fee collection. Therefore, given that the enemy at a whole stage is higher, he could not even imagine how he would have to compete in a few days. Therefore, now the option was only to avoid a duel. But the guy did not know how to do it correctly so that he was not disqualified from the academy. At that moment, Bert looked at him with a smile and said that it was quite possible to avoid a fight. However, refusing to call will mean that Zhang will forever lose the right to date at the academy. Given such terrible consequences for the guy, Zhang accepted the fact that he would still have to agree to a call. Suddenly, the system appeared and reported that the owner was assigned a new task. Namely, get the skill points for a successful tackle to the girl, and then when the owner has 10 points, he can finally unlock special skills in his system. Then Zhang was angry, because the tasks from the system seemed stupid to him and did not make sense except discomfort. He told the system cat that he had just been mistaken for the pervert and called to the duel, so such a task is now inappropriate for him. However, it was impossible to change the systemic task, and now Dali again had no right to choose, but only a certain mission. Therefore, when a stranger passed by the guy, he decided to try to take care of her and greeted him to begin. The girl did not have time to talk, but asked Dolly what exactly he wanted from her and why he stopped in the middle of the street. At that moment, the young man took up the mop and, extending her to the girl in his hands, asked, "It was by chance that she did not lose this thing." Suddenly, the stranger took the mop in her hands and broke her into 2 parts, said that she was not from the cleaning class. Zhang was afraid of a similar reaction, but to his happiness, even if this girl did not call him a pervert or immediately rush with his fists. Immediately after this situation, a system cat appeared and said that for the first successful tackle, 1 point was counted. Despite the stupid content of the task itself, Zhang thought that it was quite easy to perform and could be safely tried further. Having gained courage and confidence, Dolly went to the dining room and asked one girl whether she was alone. She suddenly stuck and blushed with awkwardness, but still postponed food that one. Then Zhang laughed and said that she had a rather large portion as a girl who decided to lunch alone. The stranger did not endure such an attitude towards herself and grabbing a plate of food, threw her right into the face of the boyfriend, after which the system appeared again and said that 2 points were counted for the tax for 2 girls. Despite such consequences, Zhang was still glad that he manages to improve his level of strength. And 3 days later, girls from the academy were discussing among themselves, who cares for everyone in a row in a campus? Like, he is trying to stun every lady whom he sees, moreover with rather stupid jokes. He tried to speak to all the girls from the company, but as it turned out, Zhang did not approach one of them, because of which the girl began to consider herself not beautiful enough. And at that moment, Dolly passed past these friends who tried to calculate how many strokes received in the last 3 days. As it turned out, in just a few days he managed to roll up to 26 girls and get the corresponding number of points. 21 girl of these all hit him on their own, and 5 more asked for this to do this. But again, a system cat appeared and said that the time to complete this task was exhausted. The cat said that the owner managed to get 26 points, and now there is the opportunity to open special skills. Zhang was just waiting for this, so without unnecessary thought he agreed to a proposal to do this right now. The guy knew that he could put glasses only by force, so it would be good if he gets some additional skill. The system congratulated the system on a new skill, and at the same moment Zhang's hand seemed to begin to fall with endless fire. Because, as it turned out, a wonderful healing fist was his new skill. Thanks to him, you can knock out all the diseases. But only the guy himself was not happy with such a gift. He considered it children's fun and said that he did not need to be treated. He did not see the benefit of this skill. Like, why did he need to treat the enemy with his fist right during the fight with him? He again began to call his system stupid and unable to stand it, hit the cat, who was his assistant. The system begged for the owner to calm down, but the guy was too angry because he was waiting for help. Therefore, now without listening to the words of the system, he decided that he would act according to his own plan and hope only on himself. Therefore, he came to the conclusion that it would be best to invest all the points earned by force, which now was equal to the 32nd level. This day was decisive, since it was today that Zhang was supposed to join the duel with an angry Edgar. The man greeted the guy and asked if he was ready for a death duel and get deservedly for his actions. Zhang asked that when he answers unbearable, Edgar would give him several more additional days to prepare. But the man replied that the guy would not dream of this, since this day has only 2 possible results. Either Zhang will die, or Edgar will survive. That was his mood. Meanwhile, people gradually began to gather in the square and asked each other with whom the high-level student was going to fight. One of those present knew that the new Zhang Dali would become the enemy, who rolled up to all girls in a row as a complete idiot. In addition, Zhang was in the cleaning class, so at least 100 people like him are needed to cope with the powerful Edgar. And the man himself turned to Choptai and ordered him to get his weapon because he did not want someone to say that the great Edgar was dishonest in battle. However, the guy had no weapon, since he did not even know that it could be allowed during a duel. Edgar was dissatisfied with such an attitude towards a fight with him, but still planned to bring to the end he had begun. Therefore, Jana threw his peak and said that he does not like to use weak advantages, but adheres to honesty. In addition, his weapon was made of deep sea iron, which has many millennia. This is a great material for weapons. Its weight was 360 kilograms, so an ordinary person will not be able to raise such weight with one hand. However, despite the fact that Jana considered an ordinary guy, the best weapon simply broke in his hands. Further, he did not make any efforts, but simply tried to learn how to use a similar subject. But its owner, Edgar, almost lost consciousness at the moment when he saw that the enemy broke his best peak. It was difficult for Edgar to restrain his indignation against the guy, but he had to behave with dignity and not be so hot-tempered as not to do nonsense. Then people around began to discuss that giving a damaged weapon to the enemy was somehow not good, and they say if they really did not know how things were going, they might think that it was Zhang is so strong and capable of breaking a spear from an old deep hydrogen iron. In addition, people drew attention to Edgar's good game. After all, they hardly really did not believe that a person sincerely was ready to give his weapons. Meanwhile, Dali himself asked the enemy if he had something more durable. The fact that it will not be so easy to break from the only touch. In an instant, Edgar's gaze changed and his eyes seemed to become blue, like stars. He was ready to break, like a real wild beast. After all, not only did Zhang drank his entire potion, which he prepared for 2 weeks, so he also broke the weapon that he forged for 3 years. Therefore, being configured to kill the guy, Edgar rushed at him with all his might, concentrating his anger. But Dali at that moment was really confused. He stood in one place and hoped that now someone would come to the rescue. He had never fought in his life before, so he did not know how to dodge or where to be to defeat the enemy. Meanwhile, Edgar began to laugh at him and asked if the young man was crazy. And now he will find out what it was to be beaten by the eldest. But in order to somehow defend himself, Zhang decided to put his hand forward, hoping that this would help him save his life. And suddenly, at the time of the collision of two soldiers, a special explosion of two different levels of forces formed between them. Edgar himself could not understand what happened. He stopped in one place and did not expect any actions from a weaker enemy. Meanwhile, Zhang simply held his hand in front of himself and thereby stopped the entire stream of Edgar's energy, which made a lot of effort. People began to laugh at their mentor. They say he does not move only to make the performance more fun. But deceiving the audience was stupid. No one could believe that Zhang could continue to stop the blow of the strongest student in full force. Therefore, they asked the man not to joke anymore, because it is one thing to win, but it is not good to mock the younger ones. But Edgar could not restrain anger and disappointment. After all, in fact, he laid out on the full. But everyone did not believe him. Meanwhile, Zhang stood with a smile on his face and said that he had never fought before, especially with cultivators. So without a concept of how this should happen, and having put the enemy on his knees, the guy asked what he needed to do next to finish this performance. But for starters, Edgar asked that Dali would let go of his hand. Since he himself could not get out of his fist, Zhang smiled maliciously and agreed to fulfill the first condition of the enemy, who barely restrained the emotion of the pain. At that moment, Edgar thought, would the guy really let him go only because he himself asked for this and show himself as a fool? But in fact, Dali was far from as a fool as he was perceived, so he decided to use his strength a little. He took the enemy's hand even stronger, and raising him up, swung to throw him to the ground. What actually did in an instant, almost without spending his strength. The guy has overcome for all the famous and strong Edgar. Now the man was lying on the ground and foam was coming from his mouth due to a strong blow to solid asphalt, which broke under him. Zhang was incredibly proud of himself at that moment, since he managed to overcome the one whom everyone was always afraid of this academy the first time. People who came to watch the fight could not understand. Edgar still continues to play, or he really became ill. But one of the spectators came to the conclusion that nevertheless it was really so strong that he defeated Edgar, like a small chick. Meanwhile, his opponent tried to recover and clench after he barely pierced the earth with his body. But when he still got to his feet, he turned to Zhang and said that the guy managed to defeat him and make even more problems. After these words, the man began to break his clothes on himself in order to demonstrate the strength and muscles, because of which they were given, can now suffer. But some of the spectators realized that the explosive fist of one blow caused by injury was involved. So Edgar took up the matter seriously. However, now this meant that the man really did not pretend. And it turns out Zhang managed to injure the enemy. The guy who seemed to be doing that, he is running after the girls, hid his true strength and essence. Meanwhile, Edgar said that he is developing a technique called a traumatic explosive fist with one blow. Therefore, as follows from the name, when a man is injured, his strength increases with an explosive pace and he can defeat the enemy with one blow. But Zhang precisely injured him, which was one of the conditions for using this explosive fist technique. Therefore, now the guy will have to know the explosive power of Edgar, which he had not previously used against such weak students. The man's fists began to glow with endless fire and making a big jump. He rushed at the young man. It was then that Zhang realized that now he was really in danger and it was worth thinking something so as not to die at the hands of the enemy. And suddenly the huge fist of Edgar was so close to Dali that he had no choice but to try to use his skill from the system. Therefore, the guy put his wonderful healing fist against the healthy man, compared to which Zhang was like a child. And it was then that the special energy began to enter the body of Edgar from Dali, which was cultivated by his special fist. The man began to feel something outside in his body and could not control it, which could not but annoy him. But at some point, all the anger disappeared, and the mighty man began to smile because of the pleasant sensations piercing his every muscle. At some point, Edgar's whole body began to decrease, and he began to correspond to his opponent. And in a matter of seconds, all the wounds received during the first defeat unexpectedly began to disappear or heal. And when the man stopped monitoring the progress of the duel, Zhang decided to use this and attach a little strength. Therefore, he grabbed Edgar by the hand and waved, again threw him from all his strength to the ground, as during the first battle. The man did not understand what was happening and why he was again in the role of the loser, despite the use of an explosive fist. It was not clear to him why suddenly all the wounds disappeared, and he was left without his explosive power. Then people around began to understand that Edgar still did not pretend, and he was really overcome by the one whom it was greatly underestimated. After all, the explosive fist of one blow caused by the injury was an advanced tester, but even Dolly was able to cope with it. Suddenly, the audience began to discuss among themselves that the guy was really very cool and it was not worth thinking about him so badly. While Edgar tried to get up and was sure that something was not clean with his opponent, because he could not lose him so easily. But since the man was again injured, he could once again use his explosive force, after which he again began to increase in size and resembled a real giant who was able to destroy the world. He rushed from the word about the desire of death on Zhang, and was sure that this time he would still be able to defeat him. But the young man himself was not going to give up, and again took advantage of his wonderful healing fist, which helped him last time. Because of which, in an instant, two people and their forces, going against each other, collided. After applying a magnificent healing fist, the opponent stood in an attempt to break someone first for some time. But soon, Edgar began to feel that a special force was again used against him, which can quickly destroy his power. Soon it happened to you, because a person began to lose his enormous size and as if dissolving in the air, after which he noticed that his body was left again without a single scratch and he was completely healed completely. And Zhang again took advantage of the moment and, grabbing the man by the hand, for the third time threw him to the ground with all his might. But he did not stop on one blow, and not letting go of Edgar's hand, again threw it over himself and hit the ground. At that moment, Ed turned in his head and began to feel sick because of such sharp movements in different directions. It was extremely difficult for him to accept his own defeat and admit that he could be weaker than a student studying in the cleaning class. But he did not give up, and knew that the deeper the wounds would be on his body, the stronger the explosive shock force would become. The man was sure that this time he would be able to collect so much rage that the enemy would definitely die. Zhang was physically not tired, but he became bored very quickly. Therefore, he asked Edgar if he was still tired of him. After all, as soon as a man showed his explosive cultivation to him, they immediately took advantage of a wonderful healing fist. At that moment, the same energy that took all his strength from him, and with it wounds, began to go through the enemy's body. Edgar was not ready that even during the fourth contract of the battle, his enemy will still have power to win. Therefore, when he completely lost the chance to win, he suddenly began to be afraid so that Zhang did not begin to beat him on the ground again. Therefore, I decided to just give up and burst into tears from misfortune. He was unknown to him a special recipe for victory. He already directly asked the guy why he continues to treat him, thereby taking all the power and strength. But having not received an answer, he knelt down and in despair all the time let out tears, which, like two fontances, flowed from his eyes. And then he said that having started the life of the cultivator, he went through many clashes. He became quite persistent, which can compete with monsters in the Sea of Stardust. However, he could not imagine that he would feel such despair during the battle with the brand new, which is studying in the cleaning class and is considered the last scum. At that moment, Zhang did not know what to answer him, because he did not expect such a reaction from a powerful warrior whom everyone loved so much. But soon he decided, because he could not just stand, and going up to the loser, tried to calm him down. To which, in response, Edgar simply rushed at the guy's feet and began to hug him, continuing to cry. People around were surprised at such a course of events and began to discuss why their mentor is hysterical. Someone suggested that this happened to Edgar because of an excess of feelings in his strength after a complex battle. It is not for nothing that they say that true love happens only between men, and the unity between a man and a woman is only a replacement. The guy who expressed his opinion always adhered to him, and was glad to finally tell everyone about it. But suddenly, the joy of people interrupted a strange earthquake. For a long time, there was no similar in this world, so something terrible foreshadowed. Zhang was not ready for this, so he was very scared when he saw what exactly appeared in front of him. It was about a terrible and giant monster, which appeared right in the middle of White Day in a large square. The monster was 10 times more than people, so I had to raise my head to make out it. Everyone around began to sound the alarm and had to hide as soon as possible, since it was too late for evacuation. As it turned out, a monster from the Sea of Stardust invaded this world. According to preliminary estimates, its level was a disaster. A terrible creation seemed to be made from a durable deep-sea iron, like the spear of Edgar. Only it was reminiscent of real fish. He had a huge tail which, by his blow, could demolish the whole educational building and kill a bunch of people. Which actually happened. The monster waved its tail along one of the buildings on the territory of the academy, which was smashed on small stones. People began to run away and transfer to everyone else about the monster of the level of disaster, which was extremely life-threatening. Many of the students and teachers for the first time saw a cursory monster, because earlier they only heard terrible stories about him. Soon the time came to appear Director Sun and his deputy Liu, who were able to get out from under the blockages of the core. The director was terribly divided due to the appearance of a marine monster and was ready to pay off with him as soon as possible. Therefore, in order to quickly demolish the head of the monster, the old Mr. Sun rushed at him with weapons, but their size was too different. After all, when a man tried to hit that huge, terrible fish, he could not apply a single scratch. Moreover, it was difficult for the director to keep his feet on the slippery surface of the monster. Then it was difficult for him to succeed. In the end, the monster waved his tail and dropped the man with all his strength that he could not stand, and fell sharply. When the deputy Lee saw what happened to her colleague, she almost burst into tears on the spot. But there was no time for this now. Now only she could go against such a monster. So taking up the weapon, the woman flew right on her goal. As soon as she turned out to be right near the body of the monster, she was so close to at least injure him with fire. But even this could not be done. The marine animal dropped the deputy Lee in the same way as the director. Zhang immediately ran to the mistress to help her. But for a start, it was worth removing the extra stones that could interfere with her to breathe. Suddenly, Mrs. Liu began to coughing a lot of blood due to damage to the internal organs, since the blow was extremely strong. The monster continued to rage and vital in the air over the island of Association, of the Academy of Improvement of Immortality. Meanwhile, Zhang helped Madame Liu carefully get up so that she would be easier to breathe, and that a woman came to her senses. Despite the deep wounds and injuries, she told the student that everything is fine with her and should not worry. But the guy ordered the guy to immediately hide, because she remembered the case when a monster of such a force for the last time invaded their territory. This situation occurred about 100 years ago, so having experience, the deputy said that now destruction cannot be avoided, because even she and Director Sun will not be able to resist the monster, so it is worth hiding soon. At that moment, Zhang looked at the sky where the monster continued to fly and said that it makes no sense to do it. But the deputy insisted that Dolly listen to her advice and still retained her life. Sanyans continued to go blood. The main character did not know what to do and how to help. Realizing that a real threat appeared in front of him, the young master began to reflect. Soon he came to the conclusion that they simply could not escape from such a huge monster. The monster, in turn, continued to destroy everything, and it seemed to no one to be saved. Suddenly, the demon drew attention to Zhang. He looked directly into the young man's eyes. But suddenly Liu, who tried to drive the monster, stood up to his defense. At the same time, the woman ordered Dolly to run away while she has such an opportunity, adding that they are obliged to save everyone who can be able to until the monster has gobbled up. The dumbfounded Zhang noticed that he could not move, and his legs began to tremble. The guy immediately informed the elder that he literally could not get out of his place. Meanwhile, a bloodthirsty demon rushed in their direction and opened his huge mouth. Thus, the monster stained them with its saliva, which spoke only about one thing. The frightened Sanyan said that apparently he was about to gobble them up. Suddenly, the woman began to use fiery attacks against the monster. The crushing flows of flame literally declared her body. Such a Dolly never saw. Liu continued to concentrate power in her hands and, as a result, created a fiery sphere. Having stated that she would burn herself better than allowing the monster to swallow herself, then she fixed the fiery ball towards the demon, which sparkled with lightning. However, her attacks were not enough to defeat the deadly monster. The teenager did not want to become food for this fish and began to think what to do next. At that moment, the monster opened his huge mouth, intending to swallow Zhang. But Dolly decided to give the last battle the demon, in connection with which he rushed to the attack. Then the guy delivered a crushing blow to the monster, later which the fish skin cracked. The demonic beast did not expect such power from such a young representative of the human race. Zhang, in turn, raised the monster above his head, which was simply incredible. Then, he threw the fish like a bag of potatoes. As a result, the demon rushed into the heaven. Dolly himself did not expect that he would be so strong and could help to drive the monster. A moment later, the monster completely disappeared behind the clouds. The teenager only looked at him. By that time, the Sanyans had been nourished by the magical power of fire and was already ready for battle. However, looking around, she never found the beast who had attacking them. In connection with which, the deputy director of the academy was asked quite a logical question of where the monster had gone. At that moment, Taozhan came to his senses and instantly rushed to resist the demon. The director of the Academy of Improvement immediately flew into the air. Looking around him, the elder never found a monster anywhere. Being in bewilderment, the old man once again flew around the academy. Suddenly, the Sanyan called out to him and called to go down, as the match was completed. Then she said that she herself could not understand why the beast had so suddenly disappeared. Then the deputy director asked the protagonist if he saw what had happened. The young master answered absolutely calmly that he personally sent this fish to heaven. Naturally, no one believed him, and everyone was extremely skeptical of his statement. Zhang was once again convinced of his incredible power, which he continued to talk about. Sun thought that the monster hit him greatly on the head and urged the young man to turn to the doctor. Of course, the guy ignored him. Then the teenager went to his hostel, where Gilbert, as always, the teaspoon began to call, and Dali, who constantly asked where this demon came from. Eberhard, in turn, was calm and asked the guy to just drink tea and relax. Then he said that in 20 years he did not achieve any progress, but initially he dreamed of becoming a great warrior. They had more inclinations, and 24 years ago he was the pride of his generation, but there was no end to the girls. But one day it came to an end to that fateful summer day. The young cultivator carefully listened to such a fascinating story of Gilbert. Then he stated that he actually asked him about a huge demon from the Sea of Stardust. Eberhard immediately interrupted him and stated that he wanted to tell him the story of his life, after which he said that in fact a huge number of terrible monsters in the Sea of Stardust. But at the bottom there is a mysterious place under the name of the Lost Palace, where all cultivators seek to get, and the only wasteland in this sea, and there are their islands where they are now. At the same time, there are more than a few thousand islands, and all of them are inhabited by various races. Also on all islands there are protected fortresses, ready to repel the attack of monsters, and so they have been living for several decades. Dali was shocked by what they heard, in connection with which he asked, "Is it really the whole world covered with water, and there are only islands without states in various countries?" Gilbert replied that everything was exactly so you need to be on his guard. The main character again asked the question whether Eberhard knows where he came from. Having made a couple more sips of his tea, the fat man said that he was from the world of people. The young master asked if he knows it for sure, or simply assumes based on the conversations of the rest. Gilbert said that almost all students here from the world of people, except for several mysterious students, which belong to ancient families or clans of cultivators, so they could get here in an unusual way. But there are those who are dragged to the islands with deception. Zhang looked at him in surprise. Then he decided to clarify what it was he in mind and why they were deceived. The young cultivator instantly got a bad foreboding, because they acted with him in a similar way. So he ended up in a world where deep-sea demons attack people, and this has already become commonplace for everyone. Suddenly, Dali realized that in fact the weak are lured here as a cannon meat. Thus, the academy can save its high-level masters, which ultimately happened to him. Meanwhile, Eberhard began to tell another story about how one old man lured the girl into this world. They fell in love with each other, but they were never destined to be together, since the sea monster dragged her. Zhang immediately remembered the old man who took Burrito from him and sent him to this island, where an extremely incomprehensible and picky system was provided to help him, what led only to one obsessive thought. He was also lured here as cannon fodder. Gilbert continued to say that that girl's name was Fanny, and she was beautiful. Eberhard so immersed in his sad memories that he almost wept. Dali was only interested in one thing, whether he could return to the human world, about which the guy asked a friend. However, the fat man said that he is actually at the other end of the planet. The perplexed young man asked how this is possible, because Gilbert said that the whole world was covered with seas. A friend said nothing, but Zhang again asked what kind of side this was. Eberhard noted that they are in a flat dimension, where there is only water around. As an example, he presented a piece of paper on the back of which they are on the other world of people. It was extremely difficult to believe, but this is really so, which the fat man stated. Dali asked if the kilometer seas and oceans there is a human world. Gilbert answered positively, adding that the academy does everything possible so that the monsters would not overtake them. Thus, they act as a restraining mechanism that does not allow monsters to get into the world of people. Suddenly, Eberhard dropped his head down, as if he remembered something sad again. The dumbfounded protagonist could not believe in what Gilbert said and asked him, "Are demons so strong that they can really invade the human world?" The fat man said that this is why there is an academy of improving the immortality of numerous races. Suddenly, the young master got worse, and he decided to rise a little. But soon the pain intensified in order, and the young cultivator could no longer endure it. The worried Eberhard, in turn, asked what happened, adding that he understands. People are completely different creatures, but you can't react like that. At that moment, Zhang suddenly fainted. The fat man did not have time to catch him. As a result, the young man collapsed to the ground without feelings. Gilbert was shocked. In this connection, he immediately went for a doctor who put the guy on the bed, after which he tried to bring him to his senses for a long time. But he never managed to do this. The dumbfounded Eberhard asked the doctor if everything was in order with him. And when he woke up, König sat on a chair and said sadly that in fact a teenager was hopeless. Assuming that the young man is mortally ill and most likely he had no time to live long, Gilbert was in shock and could not understand how this could happen to such a young guy. In this regard, the fat man again asked Gel whether his diagnosis was accurate. König confidently stated that this is really true, and he was very sorry that this happened. And there can be no mistakes, because he devoted his whole life to medicine. Then the doctor again sadly said that this guy could not help. Eberhard still could not believe that all this is true and soon he would die. For a long time the fat man looked at Zhang, after which he asked the doctor what to do. Gel picked up scissors and said that the death of a teenager would benefit them, since he can open him in detail to study the body. Without thinking twice, König rushed to Dolly with scissors in his hands, but Gilbert objected, asking the doctor not to do this. He seemed to feel that the guy would come to his senses, and after a moment, a miracle happened. Zhang really opened his eyes. Seeing an armed person in front of him, the teenager instantly jumped up. The joyful Eberhard, with a smile on his face, stated that he had finally woke up. The fat man immediately ran to him and asked that he wanted to have a bite to eat for lunch. The perplexed Dolly looked at him, not understanding what was happening at all, after which Zhang asked if he really knows about his incurable illness. Gilbert, in turn, looked sadly at the protagonist and sighed heavily. Then he was curious from a young master, where he managed to catch this disease. The young cultivator lowered his head down and said that this was a very long story, adding that even before entering the academy, the doctors issued a verdict and said he had a month left. Eberhard noted that Zhang was very decisive. Once knowing about the disease, he still came here. Dolly said that cultivators are indestructible and never get sick, and that is why he hoped for a quick recovery, having come to the Academy of Immortality. But why he is still sick, unfortunately no one knows and cannot help him. Gilbert once again noticed that he could not occupy courage, but he made a mistake. Since superhuman forces open only at a golden immortal level, basically cultivators do not have physical abilities, and getting free from a deadly disease is quite difficult. After all, they also get sick. Otherwise, the infirmary at the academy would not have been needed at all. The same applies to Dr. König, who has been heading them for several years. Gel, in turn, confirmed the words of Eberhard and said that their worlds are similar in this, adding that in fact, Zhang will die for 3 days. Dolly was shocked by such information. König grabbed the scissors and said that the guy could contribute to medicine and sacrifice his body for research. The dumbfounded teenager asked if there was really no other way, because he is not yet ready to part with life at such a young age. However, the doctor said that he is a professional, and there can be no error to predict death. At the same time, Gel even agreed to admit his defeat if Zhang lives longer than 3 days. The shocked Dolly asked Gilbert, "Is it really impossible to do anything because he has a lot of experience?" Eberhard said that for this he needs to achieve a golden immortal level, but this will take a lot of time, or find a miraculously medicine at the bottom of the sea in the Lost Palace. But the risk is quite large, and it is unlikely that Zhang will be able to get there in 3 days. Then the guy realized that he really could not deceive fate, and soon he would leave them. There was literally no face on him. The sad teenager simply stared at the floor. But unexpectedly, the system sent him a special message, and they gave him hasten to read him. At the time of the discovery of the notification, the young man was declared magic chains. The guy did not understand what happened. Soon, the program informed the owner that a wonderful healing fist acts on him only if Zhang was beating himself. The main character was instantly rejoiced, realizing that there was still a chance of salvation. At that moment, the young master jumped out of bed and, blurring in a smile, looked at the perplexing Gilbert. After that, the young cultivator suddenly hit himself in the chest. Everyone wondered what was happening. The dumbfounded Eberhard immediately asked the teenager what he was doing. The system instantly reported that the technique of miraculous healing fist has an impact. Thus, Zhang found a way to heal himself. which he was immensely happy. Koenig and the fat man did not understand what the guy rejoices like a child, as if he had been crazy. Dali, in turn, realized one thing. It is never worth discarding hope. Suddenly, Gel got nervous, suggesting that this was a dying condition, adding that usually at such moments patients begin to behave strangely and stupid. The joyful Zhang continued to behave in a similar way, which raised many questions for everyone. Soon, the young man once again began to beat himself on his arms and legs to be cured. Then again and again, they gave him to strike all parts of the body. Koenig and Eberhard were shocked by what was happening, not understanding why he was beating himself. Finally, Gilbert could not stand it and called on the teenager to stop this circus. Zhang was at a loss and pushed away a fat man from himself, saying that he was treating himself. Having said that, in fact, these simple actions will help him live on. Soon he again began to beat himself. Even Gel did not know what to do with him and how to help. Suddenly, the fat man noticed that he would not live at such a pace for 3 days, after which he again grabbed the young man by the hands and asked him to stop. But the guy said that he would beat anyone who would interfere with his self-medication. Koenig unexpectedly also called on Eberhard to let Zhang let his emotions throw out his emotions. Since Malay has suffered a strong mental shock and one cannot destroy his illusions. Finally, Gilbert calmed down and released Dali, bitterly realizing that he could no longer help. For some time, the young man continued to beat himself, which was pretty exhausted him. However, Zhang did not stop and inflicted non-strokes throughout his body. A few minutes later, the guy was finally tired and crouched on the floor to relax a bit. Realizing that this task was not from the lungs because it must be done constantly, at that moment, Eberhard came to him. He could not calm down due to the state of Dali. In this regard, Gilbert asked his friend how he feels now. Zhang instantly jumped up and with a smile on his face said that he was absolutely healthy. The fat man once again realized that Dali continues to crash and cannot accept the fact of an imminent death. Eberhard tried in every possible way to play along with him, although it was quite difficult. After all, the main character constantly repeated the same thing that he recovered and the disease retreated. But the young master did not doubt for a second in his words and said that he felt a surge of strength. The worried Gilbert asked Gel whether it was possible to remove his hallucinations. Koenig replied that the only thing they can help him is to tell the truth. What they began, the doctor urged the teenager not to live in illusions and accept reality, adding that there is no drug from his disease, which means that it is impossible to cure it. However, Zhang still stood on his own and stated that they would not achieve anything with this. At the same time, he assured that he was much better, and they were in vain so worried about him. Gel said again that this could not be and he knows better, as he is a doctor for many years. Therefore, it is better for him to order a coffin in advance. And the authorities bequeathed to his research, the young cultivator boiled with anger, shouting that they did not understand anything. The doctor also lost his temper, and his spiritual energy literally inflamed. However, he failed to argue with Zhang, because Dali was absolutely sure of his innocence. He also called on the doctor once again to examine his body in order to personally make sure of this. Naturally, Koenig agreed and said that if he was right, then the guy bequeaths him with his organs. The young man agreed and asked in response to what would happen if he won. Gel noted that if he really turns out to be healthy, he was waiting for an incredible reward. The doctor decided to give him a jug of essence from the core of a deep-sea monster in case of his defeat. Dali said that he did not pull him by the tongue, and soon the essence would belong to him. Then the guy sat on the bed and called on Koenig to examine his body, rather to examine. The doctor, in turn, extended his hand forward and began to scan the organism of Zhang. At the same time, he constantly stated that soon the body was given to his possessions. Gel for a long time checked the guy for any disease and ailments. However, he didn't find anything. The teenager smiled all the time, believing in his recovery. The dumbfounded Koenig could not believe his eyes and simply froze in place. Satisfied with himself, the young man asked what the verdict of such a competent doctor would be. The shocked Gel noted that most likely he incorrectly considered his body. Therefore, it is necessary to examine him again, which he began to do. However, this time he was waiting for an amazing result. Zhang understood that he was right. The doctor was asked just one question: how the disease could retreat unauthorizedly. Coffin's silence hidden into the room. But in the expression on Koenig's face, the young man understood everything. Finally, Gel asked Zhang how much this was possible and what he did. Then he crouched to Dali on the bed and noticed that almost all his illness disappeared. And since he was never mistaken in his life with a diagnosis, Koenig again asked how the guy did it. Zhang, in turn, smiled and said that he still managed to deceive fate. The perplexed doctor asked the protagonist that this means all. The joyful young master replied, "This means that now he can work miracles." Eberhard was also shocked by what happened, not understanding how this is possible. At this moment, the young cultivator called on König to fulfill his part of the contract. Having stated that now Gel is obliged to share the essence of a deep-sea monster, the doctor, in turn, still could not move away from what happened and sighed heavily. After all, this is the first time that he was mistaken with a diagnosis, and besides, he never met a more strange case. Then he got out of bed and called on Jang to follow him to get his reward. Thus, they all together ended up in the laboratory of Gel, from which Dali had goosebumps. The remains of monsters and human organs were everywhere, which looked gloomy enough. The dumbfounded teenager asked what kind of place this place was so terrible. König immediately smiled and stated that this was just a small laboratory, adding that it was here that he dissected thousands of different monsters. Gel also began to say that he had quite valuable specimens. Then the doctor turned to Zhang and said that he was also going to store his corpse in this place. Then he said that he would be interested to open such a unique body. Dali was shocked to hear this from König and literally froze in place. Soon, they went further around the laboratory and went to another room. Gel said that he did not have much this essence left, since it often burns out and not just get it. In a few years, he managed to pick up only 8 jugs. He urged the young man to choose one of them. In fact, König held the most expensive essence in another place and was not going to give it to Jang. Meanwhile, Dali went to the jugs and began to carefully examine them. For a long time he could not decide, and unexpectedly he received a warning from the system, which informed him that if he chooses a container with special blood, he will be able to switch to the next level of development. Naturally, Dali appreciated the help of the program and continued to choose a copy. Gel, in turn, unexpectedly began to rush a teenager with a choice. A moment later, Zhang grabbed one of the jugs and already wanted to leave the laboratory. However, the system said that this essence from a low-level monster would not increase the level, adding that in fact there is a special ashes in a small cabinet to the left of him. Then Dali realized that the doctor was not going to share this essence with him. König noticeably began to be nervous and say that the guy was only one chance to choose a jug, and he is not subject to return. At this time, Zhang climbed into the locker, which the program informed him. Dissatisfied, Gel nervously asked what he was doing and how dare to climb his personal things. Finally opening the same box, Dali saw a special essence and was delighted. After that, the teenager took out a jug and said that he wants to choose this particular. The doctor was shocked, not understanding how Maleta learned about her, and even more so found the main character, as if König did not hear and rejoiced at his incredible find. The shocked Gel, in turn, asked how he found out about her. The young master stood up silently and headed for the laboratory exit, then turned around. The young cultivator instantly broke into a smile and said that he was able to work miracles. The embittered doctor asked if he really considers himself special. The guy answered positively, which greatly bent König, who urged him not to carry nonsense, having stated that this jug is the most precious thing and he found it in the destroyed palace. Therefore, he cannot simply take and give this special essence to Jang. But Dali reminded him that they had an agreement, and now he is violating his own rules. Then Gel said that he was ready to sacrifice the rest of the 8, but not this copy. At the same time, the doctor ordered the teenager to immediately put the jug on the table. However, Zhang did not listen to him and stated that he honestly won this essence. König once again inflamed with spiritual energy and asked if he was sure of Dali and his choice. Gel also fixed his huge scissors in him, trying to influence the decision of the youth. But not a threat, no promises. It seemed that nothing would make the guy retreat back. The doctor continued to nourish the scissors with electricity and direct them aside Dali. Suddenly, the young man said that if König does not stop having to push him, then he will drink the essence right now. But Gel noticed that if the guy really drinks her, he would die, and in this case, he will definitely receive his body to place him in the bank and leave him in the laboratory. However, Zhang nevertheless decided to drink part of the miraculous essence, which plunged everyone into shock. The distraught doctor ordered him to immediately stop it and put the jug in his place, adding that they had no right to do this because this essence is difficult to get. Gilbert also did not understand why Jang was behaving so recklessly, which he asked him. Dali at that moment resolved the essence of special blood, and he even liked it. Finally, the teenager put the jug on the table and said that she was very tasty. At this moment, the system told the owner that he drank the blood of a special monster. Thus, the The development of the guy has reached the 10th level of the stage of gathering spirits. What Zhang was immensely happy because he was finally able to improve his skills. After a couple of seconds, he really felt a surge of strength. His spirit also became stronger. The next step is for the young man. It was a transition to the stage of blood coagulation. However, it was too early to talk about this. Koenig, meanwhile, was furious from the actions of the malts. Suddenly, he said that now the guy definitely would not live until tomorrow morning, since after half an hour the maximum will simply tear him out from the inside. But he himself did not think so. In connection with which he began to say that they could conclude another bet. But this time everything will be honest, Gel, in turn, thought about his proposal. Naturally, Koenig wanted to recoup for the last time and agreed to argue with him again. Naively believing that he will still be able to take the body of a young master for his research, the protagonist looked around and asked that Gel still had valuable. The doctor instantly went to the table and opened the upper box, where there was an unknown object. The doctor took out the oval sphere of green and headed for the young cultivator. He claimed that this is a unique object that can be put on con. He also stated that this egg was found in the destroyed palace, while it is not known which monster it belonged. But Koenig was absolutely sure that this was not an ordinary demon and an expensive egg. Having added that he had an egg for 3 years but everything was unsuccessfully, this once again confirmed his unusualness. The system immediately informed the owner that an egg of a special monster was found. The program claimed that if you prepare a potion from it, you can instantly raise 5 levels. In this connection, Zhang naturally agreed that Gel put this egg, realizing that this subject will clearly help him in improvement and he will become even stronger. The doctor was looking forward to the moment when they gave him to die and said goodbye to his body, which he will subject to numerous experiments to extract the maximum from it. However, after more than 5 minutes, the teenager was in full health. The dumbfounded Koenig could not believe what was happening and began to declare that this was impossible. After all, a normal person would have died from the drunk essence of such a monster. The shocked Gel nervously asked what he had done and why he still has not died. Zhang blurred in a malicious smile and said that he, as before, was doing miracles. The doctor understood that such a copy could not be lost and wanted to get the guy's incredible body anyway by any means. What he told him, but Dolly had a completely different opinion on this subject. Koenig instantly grabbed huge scissors and tried to pierce the body of a teenager. But Zhang not only dodged the blow, but also knocked the egg out of the doctor's hands, thereby assigning it to himself. Gel was depressed and did not know how to outwit the young representative of the human race. He literally collapsed to his knees and said that Dolly had taken the most valuable essence and egg of the demon from him. But this is all that he managed to accumulate for 10 years. The loss was incredible. The guy, in turn, asked Koenig still had something else valuable. An embittered doctor understood that it was better not to contact this magician. In flapping with fire, the distraught doctor immediately began to drive him out of his laboratory. He also urged the young man not to catch his eye anymore, only in the form of a dead body. Thus, Zhang took such precious materials from him and went to Gilbert, where together they began to cook the monster egg and looked forward to the result. Suddenly, Eberhard said that the egg is cooked for more than 3 hours and is already possible. Dolly immediately lowered his hand into the water to surely understand whether the egg was welded. But the water was cold, and the guy suggested that it was not ready yet. The fat man noticed that it was very strange because it has been cooking for a long time. But the water has not even warmed up. In this regard, Gilbert suggested that in fact, the egg absorbs heat. A moment later, a characteristic smell appeared, and the protagonist thought that he would soon prepare. Some more time passed, but a huge egg was never welded, which raised questions. Meanwhile, the smell came to the rooms of the girls, and they could not ignore him. They did not understand where this dope came from, and began to look into each room. But they did not find anything. Then Zunqin asked Meili whether she felt this incredible aroma. The girl inhaled her nose as much as possible and replied that this was a good smell, because she immediately wanted to eat, which in principle was not surprising. 2 more hours passed, and Eberhard put a finger in the water, but it again turned out to be cold. The perplexing fat man asked Zhang why she still had not heated, but Dolly himself did not know. He just wanted to quickly eat him in order to increase the level. The teenager asked Gilbert what to do, because he was a rather experienced person. At the same time, the young man understood that he needed to eat this egg, since lifting 5 levels was not easy. Eberhard only said that this egg of unusual origin, therefore, is difficult to cook. Then he proposed replacing water with oil and using the true flame of the sleds. Jiang was extremely interested in this and continued to ask his friend exactly how to do it. In addition, he was interested in what this is the most true flame. Gilbert said that for this they needed Jiang, as this is her special skill. Because Junchen has long been specializing in the development of the heavenly fire of the Tao. Meanwhile, it seemed to girls in the hostel that the aroma became only stronger. Jiang said that this delicious smell literally dispersed all over the hostel. Mei Li noted that the source of the smell seemed very close and she was hungry. Chen, in turn, began to walk around the room to understand where this fragrance comes from. Suddenly, it seemed to her that the smell was coming straight from the corridor, and she headed for the door. Opening the front door, the girl saw on the threshold of the smiling Dolly with Eberhard. The guys greeted the young lady. In the hands of Gilbert was a basin with an egg. Ziyun did not expect to see Zhang and was extremely surprised by his sudden appearance. The young man, in turn, began to reflect on how best to ask Zhang about the service. But unexpectedly, he saw Mei Li in the room and was shocked, realizing that he needed to apologize. Jun also began to knead his fists and asked him how he dared to come here. The guy immediately began to say that day there was a misunderstanding, and he decided to make amends, adding that for this he brought a special dish that they definitely like. It only remained for Zunchen to prepare him, but he did not know how to ask her about it. The girls at that moment breathed deeper the incredible aroma, believing that it was really tasty. Chen also noted that they could not understand where this delicious smell came from. Eberhard, in turn, said that in fact this is an egg of a deep-sea monster, which gives not only an increase in strength but also beauty and eternal youth. Naturally, the girls wanted to always look young and beautiful. Gilbert knew how to influence them. Suddenly, Mei Li grabbed a basin with an egg from the fat man and said that apologies were accepted. Then she drove the guys from the female hostel. But this was not part of the main character's plans. Therefore, the young master said that everything is not so simple because the egg still needs to be prepared. And since this is a rather complicated process, he would like to personally attend when cooking. A moment later, they all went into the room together to finally cook an egg. Junchen heated him for a long time with the help of his unique ability. The young cultivator noted that the flame of the Sanyans is really effective. The temperature instantly began to increase and it seemed that everything would be ready soon. After a couple of minutes, the egg unexpectedly began to crack and everyone thought that it was boiling. The smell became even more saturated. Everyone was looking forward to the moment when they were worried. Jiang perfectly understood that he should try the first dish, because improvement, first of all. Jiang said that she was clearly not in vain for an hour in a Sanyan flame for an hour. Mei Li kept with all her strength so as not to grab the egg and not to gobble it up with a shell. Zhang asked the rest whether they were ready to finally try this exquisite dish. The fat man smiled and replied that he would not wait for this moment to taste him. Dolly was also hungry and wanted to quickly bite off the part and climb 5 levels. At the same time, the smell became even more saturated and everyone was in anticipation. Mei Li also naively believed that she would have a good snack now, especially since she had never tried such a dish. The egg continued to be covered with numerous cracks in boiling water. After a couple of minutes, the paw of an unknown animal suddenly escaped from the egg. Everyone was in shock and did not understand what was happening at all, because the egg was supposed to be cooked. Soon, an incomprehensible creature that looked like a hare or a fox came out of the shell. The animal, in turn, was extremely dissatisfied with what was happening, which was red on his face. The dumbfounded Eberhard could not understand why it was not cooked in such a temperature. The perplexing Zhang asked everyone what to do with this animal now. Naturally, Dolly could not miss the opportunity. Rise to 5 levels. Gilbert unexpectedly offered the haste of an animal, since it did not work out to cook it, adding that the meat of a deep-sea monster should still be tasty and healthy. The guy considered that this was really the only option and agreed with a friend. In addition, abandoning such a precious system award was extremely stupid. But as soon as he reached for the animal, Zunchen grabbed the plush hare and began to play with him. Having stated that he was very sweet, Zhang was bitterly aware of it would not be possible to prepare the animal. At the same time, Zhang said that the bunny is very beautiful and you can't eat it. Mei Li even stated that they had given a bloodthirsty monster, which was not sorry for anyone. The main character has practically resigned to the fact that there was no increase. However, at this moment, the system hastened to tell the young master the important news. If he eats the cub of a deep-sea demon, he will be able to increase 10 levels. The young cultivator understood that at all costs he needed to fry this hare. Suddenly, the animal leaned against Xianchen and immediately pushed her away from her. After that, the animal said that Jiang should let him go since she is a human female. All were shocked by such an unexpected turn of events and literally froze in place. Gilbert, in turn, stated that this is unthinkable, because it turns out the hare knows how to speak human language. The girls instantly grabbed a living toy and began to call him to say something sweet. The animal still resisted and tried to break out of their strong embrace. Then he suddenly said so that the animal servant would immediately release him. As it turned out, the hare turned to Zhang and asked to remove Junqin from him. But Dali was in no hurry to help him, and asked what else for the animal servant. In response, the animal for some reason began to insult the teenager and say that he was not smart. After all, if he raised him, then he is his personal servant. The young man was in shock. In this connection, Zhang hurried to object to a small animal, saying that he was not his servant, adding that the hare is generally unnecessarily, with the exception of one moment. At this time, Eberhard told a friend that he did not see the whole picture entirely, because talking monsters are quite rare and there are very few of them. Dali asked in response, "Is this eared fox really worth a lot of money?" Gilbert extremely confidently stated that he could get a round amount for him. In addition, their dean has a duck that has learned to speak at a later age, and she has extreme force and is constantly entering the 10 best pets in all tournaments. And recently, the dean was offered a huge bunch of money for a duck, but he refused. Then Zhang decided to take the hare with him, and then reflect on to sell him, or fry and increase 10 levels to become much stronger. The animal, meanwhile, continued to demand that his servant was given, obeyed his fluffy lord. The teenager asked for forgiveness from Yunqin and said that he would take the animal with him. However, the girl objected and stated that the hare will stay here, and now he belongs to her. Mei Li naturally took her side and did not allow the young man to take away the hare from them. But the guy said that this is his little master and he must return home. After that, Zhang bowed low to the pet and said that he was paying tribute to his lord. Zhang was shocked by what was happening, not understanding what was happening at all. Dali at that time pulled the animal by the tail and said that he had to leave. Thus, the young man still managed to take the animal with him, leaving the girls with nothing. Mei Li and Chen could not understand why the hare did not want to stay with them and left with Zhang. The next day, an unknown bird circled over the Academy of Immortality. Naturally, no one could notice her, because she soared high in the clouds. Suddenly, the sea raked, and a strong wind rose. The waves constantly rolled to the island. A moment later, another terrible monster crawled out onto the surface of the water. Meanwhile, unknown monks were inside the palace and talked about a certain situation, to which they have gone all their strength to finally solve this problem. The other noted that their time is running out, and it is worth hurrying to achieve success, since the reaction rate of deep-sea demons suddenly increased in comparison with the academy. In addition, the palace attracts countless different monsters. One of the masters suggested that this time it would be quite difficult for them to achieve the goal, by adding that at the same time they must do everything possible in order to achieve the necessary result. At this time, the main character walked the streets with his friend Gilbert and a fluffy pet. Suddenly, the animal screamed sharply and loudly enough that scared Eberhard with Zhang. The young cultivator in bewilderment asked the hare why he screamed. The cunning fox, in turn, replied that there was a living child on that side. Then he ordered his bestial servant to bring him this cub. The dumbfounded Dali looked into the distance, where the boundless sea was, and asked where it was a child. The hare immediately replied that the child was behind the sea on the next island, adding that a huge number of monsters have already headed there and therefore you need to hurry. Extremely surprised, Zhang asked if there was still another island ahead. Then Dali asked Gilbert if there is an island there, because he said that the archipelago with the academy is the only land in this world. Eberhard repeated his words that really the rest of the square is covered with ocean of stardust. Suddenly, the hare began nervously shouting that animal servants did not have the right to argue with him. The guy immediately called him to calm down and put his hand on his fluffy head. At the same time, he stated that in fact the animal is not a lord, and if he does not stop here, he would become a meat delicacy. Gilbert instantly asked Zhang to calm down and not to create problems out of the blue. After all, initially it was necessary to find out how much money you can get for that fox. After a certain time, they went to the main street of the academy and walked along it. Dali, in turn, asked Eberhard where they were going. The fat man pointed to the Tower of Animals and said that first they need to get there. After all, it is in the tower that they can conduct tests and determine what this animal is, since sometimes the price of a seemingly mediocre beast can grow several times, and there are people who, at the time of rich, thanks to the sale of magic animals, Zhang again asked his friend whether they could definitely get good money for this hair. Gilbert answered positively, because the animal knew how to talk from birth. The main character, like Eberhard, could not wait for the moment they sell the animal. Meanwhile, they were getting closer to the Tower of Animals and were in anticipation of trading. However, suddenly the fat man stopped halfway, which made Zhang think. The perplexed young master asked why Gilbert stopped abruptly. Eberhard replied that he only remembered now, because Nang was set responsible for testing in the tower. The dumbfounded young cultivator asked if he was talking about Brother Mealy. After all, if this is true, then nothing will work out, because Jun hates him. Gilbert called on Dolly simply to explain to him that he was mistaken, and this would not happen anymore. However, the young man said that he still has pride and therefore this is excluded. The fat man, in turn, noticed that the guy was just too young and unlawed, adding that when he lives up to his age, then such a problem will not arise, because we definitely need to choose wealth. Zhang finally agreed with him and said that he was also choosing wealth. Then he immediately moved towards the tower. Eberhard was surprised and said that the teenager would grow up quickly. A moment later, they went inside the test tower and saw Nenga in front of them, who trained diligently with a peak in his hands. Dali abruptly stopped opposite him. Then Sun greeted him, calling him his older brother, but Nigna did not like it. In this connection, the guy immediately directed his weapon at him and said that he was not his brother. In addition, Zhang does not have the right to be here at all. The young man was silent. Suddenly, Gilbert supported Sun and said that he really could not call him a brother. Then he winked at Dali and added that it was better to call him a respected uncle. Neng, in turn, menacingly looked at them with his displeased physiognomy. Therefore, Sun instantly drove them away, saying that such garbage could not be here. At the same time, he noticed that his beautiful sister would once find a worthy person, and Zhang dared to mislead her, but he will no longer allow them to communicate with her. From which, of course, Dali was not badly damaged, because he himself did not burn with the desire to be friends with her. Suddenly, the fat man asked the guy why he was silent, urging him to answer Suna at least something. But suddenly, the teenager said that in fact Neng was absolutely right, then finally plunged everyone into shock. After that, an awkward pause occurred in the room again. Eberhard decided to help him. The fat man immediately began to ask Sun to forgive the young man and make a discount at his young age. By adding that they just came to check the potential of the speaking monster, Neng looked in surprise at the cub of a deep-sea demon and thought. Then Zun said that their pet still could not be compared with the one whom the dean found. Moreover, his duck possesses magical properties and learned to speak only maturing. Zhang instantly began to flutter the eared beast and urge him to say at least something. The hare did not specifically pronounce, not a word, which greatly puzzled his master. Soon, the teenager once again asked the animal to say a few words, but he was still silent. Then Neng could not stand it and ordered the guy not to play the performance before him, having stated that even if Dali had prepared a stew from this hare, he would still not forgive him. At that moment, the animal unexpectedly said that they would not make any stew from him, adding that this thug should put on a steak for such a rough handling. The dumbfounded Jun began to listen to him, realizing that the animal was really talking. Gilbert immediately noticed that now Neng would not deny the obvious. In addition, this is the merit of a young master who will soon achieve success and will become more famous. After which, Eberhard once again asked Sun to forgive the young cultivator. The guy looked at the protagonist and his friend for a long time. Suddenly, Neng said that he has one very important question for Zhang. Dali, in turn, rushed him with a question, saying that he would honestly answer him. Finally, Zun asked if the guy could guarantee that he would not leave his sister in grief and in joy, and even if something terrible happens, he will still stay with her and will protect her. Zhang instantly replied that this would never happen. Then Nenga only infuriated. Gilbert began to say that he should answer differently, since the consequences could be irreversible. Meanwhile, Zhun boiled with anger and again grabbed his long peak. Then he ordered them to immediately leave the Tower of the Tests of Animals. The fat man tried to calm him down and said that he was simply hastened to answer. Eberhard also asked Zhang to change his mind and answer the way Sun would like. But the young man repeated his negative answer again and asked what Gilbert would do in his place. The fat man smiled and said that, of course, he would refuse such a fate, adding that Dali is unlikely to be able to find a beautiful girl at all, and he will be able to do this, which naturally had doubts about the teenager. But he decided to keep silent so as not to offend the fat man and simply watched what was happening. Neng continued to overtake the situation and again demanded that they leave here. At this moment, an unknown person entered the tower and asked if the animals were tested here. Everyone instantly turned around and stared at a rather strange stranger, who rushed in their direction and repeated his question. Everyone began to look at each other. Near the unknown man, there were two extremely unusual animals. One of them was very similar to a wolf. The other looked more like a tiger. His name was Xuan Hao, and he was a real elf. The stranger wanted to check his pets. At this moment, animals began to play among themselves, which began to amuse everyone. Suddenly, Neng said that he was responsible for the animal testing tower. At the same time, he noticed that if the animals are not given by students of the academy, then the price doubles. The guy replied that their elven race never had a shortage of money, in connection with which Hao rudely and in the orderly tone urged Suna to check his pets. At this time, the system informed the main character that he discovered the race of elves, and it is on this subject that he receives a long-term task. The young man was surprised. After that, the young master asked what was the essence of the mission. The program answered, it was necessary to collect the essence of the blood of all races. The perplexing young cultivator asked what kind of task this is. Suddenly, Zhuan asked Jiana a question. Did he really decide to check his animal? Gilbert noticed that this Hao is a student of the academy from the Faculty of Elves, and the previous king invested a huge amount of money into the academy, and therefore their faculty is the richest and most famous. Also, the elves were excessively arrogant and always looked at the human race. Zhuan continued to ask Dali why he brought with him this useless hair. After all, even they, rich elves, would not throw money into the wind in this way. Then, the self-confident and extremely arrogant Hao said that his beautiful cats are much more attractive to some hair, which can only feed the fighters before the battle. And then, in extreme cases, Zhang said Nengu that he did not like the excessive pomp of this elf. Sun immediately stated that although he was from the elven race, he was not allowed to behave in this way. Zhuan replied that he simply told the truth about this hair and they had nothing to do with it, adding that only the dean has a gifted duck, but basically people do not have worthy magic pets. Dali again turned to Nengu, saying that this elf crosses all the boundaries and tries to belittle the animals of the human race. Then the guy said that in fact their pets are much stronger than the elven. Naturally, Hao reacted instantly and began to confidently declare the opposite. Then he completely called the teenager a madman, because their animals are a head above human and all know this. However, the young man did not step back and invited him to arrange a competition of animals. Xuan laughed and said that his animals were not afraid of some hair. Zhang, in turn, asked for permission from Sun to perform in a competition on behalf of the human race. Of course, Neng was initially against it, but decided to keep silent once again, looking at the guy. Gilbert supported his friend and said that he would definitely root for him. At the same time, Eberhard even suggested increasing bets so that it was much more interesting to fight. Dali liked this idea, and he instantly addressed her to the elf, offering a bet, having stated that if his hair wins, then Xuan will provide him with a test tube of elven blood. Hao was extremely surprised by such a confidence of the young man, and, of course, agreed to his conditions. But then he asked the teenager what would happen if his hair loses. Without thinking twice, Zhang replied that then he would provide him with a test tube of human blood. Xuan immediately objected, because human blood was an absolutely useless thing. Unlike their essence, which can significantly improve vision, the elf continued to say that he did not need the blood of a young master, since he is not a vampire, adding that if he cannot come up with an equivalent rate, then the bet is cancelled. The main character asked Gilbert what to do, because he had nothing. Eberhard immediately picked up a gold broom sparkling with bright rays. The fat man asked Zhuan if this was enough for the bet. Everyone was shocked. Neng asked Gilbert, was he really ready to sacrifice her? Of course, Hao knew what kind of legendary thing this was and instantly agreed. What the elf so joyfully reported, naively believing that he would soon get him. The perplexing young cultivator asked his friend what kind of broom was and where he took it. Sun noted that Zhang was really stupid, since he does not know about the existence of a golden broom. Then he began to tell that this artifact is one of the 3 in the human faculty, and some time ago, there was no cleaning class in the academy, while others simply did not want to do this and the island was mired in garbage. And the dean found a piece of divine metal in a flooded palace and asked the dwarves to overcome the magical artifact. At that moment, Hao interrupted his monologue and added that soon the broom was in the faculty of the human race, and then she was played out at one of the contests, and thus ended up with him. The elves still say that such precious material should not be put on a broom, but some weapon. But soon he will correct this mistake of people and will melt it to a more valuable item. Soon, rumors about the arrogant elf diverged throughout the island, and everyone only talked about him. At the same time, the students were aware that one of the representatives of the human faculty decided to be measured by the forces of the pets. Naturally, students hurried to go to this event to support Dali. After some time, everyone gathered in the arena and was looking forward to the start of the competition. However, almost no one knew who was honored to defend their faculty, and only a few were aware that it was the freshman Jang will resist the elf. The others suddenly remembered that this was the same guy who molested the girls. Many were against Jang to represent the human faculty. Dissatisfied, Dali at that time asked Gilbert why so many people gathered. Eberhard said that not every day they have a similar one, but the hare must win. After a couple of seconds, Neng announced the beginning of the competition, which the audience immediately rejoiced. After that, Sun asked each of the participants to put his pet on the magic stone to determine his level. The first to volunteer, Swan, who had an elite animal of the 7th level. Everyone literally began to admire the elven race, saying that they justify their reputation. It is worth noting that the 7th level of an elite beast is a really incredible result. The arrogant Hao arrogantly asked the guy if he understood what he decided to get involved in. At the same time, Zhuan literally could not stop and praised his animals. The next was his second pet, like a tiger. He had a snow-white color. From the representative of the Koshachi family, spiritual energy immediately spilled out in huge quantities. After a couple of seconds, it became known that the animal has a 9th level and was also elite. The dumbfounded audience began to understand that the young master could not win in this competition. At that moment, self-confident Zhuan urged the protagonist to show his hair, but students instantly objected that it was the young cultivator to represent their faculty, supposing that it is simply ridiculous to put some hair against the tigers. Pupils continued to stand on their own and demand that Jana replace someone else. However, Dali ignored their cries and headed for the stone construction. After all, he perfectly understood that this speaking animal is extremely unusual. But as soon as the guy put his pet on the stone, someone stopped him. The perplexing teenager turned around and saw an unknown person in front of him. In fact, it was Xiao Yang, who also studied at the human department at the academy. The students naturally recognized him and began to say that he was part of the top 5. The girls, in turn, also admired him and literally dreamed of sharing existence with him. Indeed, upon admission to the Academy of Immortality, he possessed the 7th level of gathering spirits. And since then, the guy naturally has become much stronger and literally overshadowed all the students. Xiao, in turn, went to the stone pedestal and asked Dali to move aside. But Zhang did not do this and asked why he had to leave the competition. Then Jan stated that he had a 0 level upon admission, which is the anti-record of the academy. And after that, instead of studying diligently, he constantly ran after the girls. And therefore, given all of the above, he does not have the right to represent the human faculty. However, Dali said that this competition is personal, which means that he should go aside. She stood on his own and said that the young man needs to show prudence and not yet late to leave. Then Jan suddenly said that, apparently, this little one decided to discredit the reputation of their faculty. After that, a self-confident student urged Zhang to look at his mountain bird, which is an extremely rare monster and will definitely be able to compete with the elf. At this moment, the bird took off into the height and began to apply thunderous attacks towards the stone stele, thus demonstrating his superiority to a guy with an incomprehensible hair. Naturally, everyone supported the Xiao and called for Dali to move aside, so as not to disgrace. Then Zhang asked if he would let him forward, whether John could give him the blood of the elf. A perplexed guy asked him a counter-question why he should give the essence of elven blood. Jan, in turn, noticed that the young master should be grateful to him, that he would save him from shame. Suddenly, Xiao asked Neng who, in his opinion, should represent their faculty, and who has much more chances to resist the magic animals of Zhuan. Of course, Sun said that it was Jan who needs to take part in this competition. The dumbfounded protagonist objected, saying that he cannot abandon his words. And this is clearly because of his sister. Because he dreams of taking revenge on him, Neng immediately rushed to Dali by stating that if he really wanted to take revenge on him, he would have chosen another way, and most likely he would simply broke his legs. Zhang was shocked by such a statement. The young cultivator, in turn, perfectly understood that everything was against him. Sun noted that the matter was not in personal hostility. Just Jan really deserved to participate in the competition. In addition, none of the students supports Dali and does not want him to speak on behalf of the human faculty. And if there is at least one person who will vote for him, then he will take part in the competition. The teenager, in turn, began to look around. but the audience was silent. Naturally, everyone believed that he could not defeat the elf with his incomprehensible hair. The guy suddenly shouted that if they gave him a chance, he would not let them down. Everyone continued to look at him silently, but Zhang again asked them to support him. Students began to look at each other, realizing that the young man could not convince anyone. Dolly, with bitterness, realized that no one wants to see him in this tournament and did not believe in him. At the same time, he understood that Xiao had already earned a kind of reputation, unlike him. Therefore, the reaction of the crowd was finally clear. The guy reconciled with the fact that Yang would speak instead. However, a moment later, a female voice shouted that she supported him. The crowd began to diverge to the sides and Mei Li stood in front of them. Following her, Zunqin said that she believes in a young master and supports him with a hair. Zhang was shocked by such an unexpected turn of events, and his eyes lit up again. He could not even think that it was Mei Li and Jiang to support him. That was a rather pleasant surprise. The perplexing Neng looked at his sister and did not understand why she sharply changed her attitude to the malts. Naturally, the extremely displeased Jun hurried to curl in her why she decided so. Mei Li, in turn, did not explain anything and only asked her brother to give the guy a chance. But the restless Neng again said that this person is not worthy to take part in the competition. But the sister said that the matter is not in him, but in the human faculty, and he is obliged to give a chance to Dolly. Zhanchen also joined her words, who also believed in Zhang's victory. The guy, in turn, began to thank the girls for their help, saying that he would not let them down. After all, they are the only ones who really believed in him, which means everything is not in vain. The main character did not expect those who would support him would be the girls. However, Mei Li said that in fact she does it for the sake of a hair. Zhang also said that she believes in this Fluffy and he would definitely win. However, they stated that the young master had nothing to do with it. Finally, Sun said that since there were really people who believed in him, it means that he could take part, but only after Xiao demonstrates the abilities of his pet. Thus, John was the first to go to check the level of his unusual bird. Nung urged the guy not to disgrace the human faculty so as not to blush for him. Naturally, Xiao was full of confidence and stated that he would definitely win, adding that his bird was caught on 10,000 years of grief and it is extremely rare. And despite the fact that this is the first test, its level is quite high. A moment later, a self-confident Jan released a pet, ordering to show his strength. The bird immediately rushed to the miraculous stone structure. At the same time, her spiritual energy literally sparkled, and the students admired it. After a couple of seconds, it became clear that the bird has an elite 9th level. But how had such a result? What spoke of a draw in this competition was a pretty good result, because the last time they lost to the elves, self-confident Xiao was pleased with this outcome of the competition, as well as everyone else. Yang once again said that his task was fulfilled, since he did not lose to the elven faculty. Students really considered him an incredible master and admired him. After all, not every student has a pets of the 9th elite level. People continued to shout his name, saying that he was simply incredible. Swimming in the rays of the glory of the Xiao called for Zhang and not to go out at all, so as not to disgrace. But Dolly said that if he gives him the blood of the elf, then he would refuse to participate. Of course, Zhang once again replied that he would not provide him with such an honor. Finally realizing that the guy could not convince, Xiao left this useless venture. As a result, he said that if Zhang really wants to disgrace, then this is his choice. Then the young man moved towards the magic stone to determine the level of the hair. But suddenly Zhuan stopped him. Everyone froze in anticipation, not understanding what was happening. Hao said that in fact, he had not yet completed the test of his pets. Jun was at a loss and asked the elf, did he really have the 3rd pet to check? Zhuan, in turn, began to smile and stated that it was easier to show than to explain. After which he began to carry out some magical manipulations, and the animals shone with spiritual energy. As it turned out, Hao took advantage of the equipment of combat animals. A tiger with a wolf instantly rushed towards a stone pedestal. Suddenly, Suan's fighting animals literally flew into the other, merging in one magic clistus. This sphere sparkled with incredibly powerful spiritual energy. As a result of this process, 2 pets merged together and represented one beast. At the same time, the aura has significantly increased the animal. Everyone was amazed at Hao's witchcraft. The arrogant elf said that people still have to learn from him. Others began to understand that its level would be much higher than the previous one. Xiao also was well aware that his bird could not be compared with the pet's Zhuan. However, Jan could not do anything and only watched what was happening from the side. Hao once again said that the elven faculty is much stronger than human. Soon the self-confident Zhuan urged his pet to go to the test stone. A moment later, the animal climbed onto the pedestal. After it, a stream of powerful energy was visible. All were shocked by the outcome of assessing the abilities of the magic beast, because he was at the leader of the leader, which was an unimaginable result. Naturally, everyone began to understand that the elven faculty would win again. After all, the leaders of the animals were extremely strong and ruled certain territories. In this connection, the majority wondered what status the Hao himself has. In addition, among the elves, few could boast of a pet of this level. Yana, like the rest, had nothing to say, realizing that this is another defeat of their faculty. Anger overwhelmed Xiao, especially when he looked at such an arrogant Zhuan. Neng, in turn, said rather sadly that they lost again. After all, since he works in the testing tower, the faculty has never won the faculty. Hao noticed that the human race was always less talented, and everyone knows that. And that is why animals do not like them, in connection with which they will not be able to educate a unique pet. Adding that competing with the elves, people only belittle themselves and disgrace their race. Students began to wonder if even animals encourage people. Zhuan continued his mocking monologue, considering himself unique. But suddenly, Juncheng demanded that he immediately stop this performance. Since victory does not give him the right to belittle others, Hao continued to smile. Then he noticed that he was just saying facts, because only the human race has stopped in development. Because for so many years, people have never got into 100 best warriors. Everyone immediately fell silent, realizing that Zhuan is absolutely right and there was nothing to object to. Hao again said that at the same time they had not a single genius for so much time, and therefore the Tower of Tests of Animals must be transferred to the ground of elves. All students were horrified by his words, hoping that this would never happen. Finally, the elf finished his self-confident speech, after which an awkward pause came. But suddenly, Zhang said that Zhuan was overly arrogant and carries complete nonsense. The main character really believed that he could change the course of the competition. However, everyone else was not so confident and skeptical about this. Xuan, in turn, also believed that the young master was simply idle. But the young cultivator confidently stated that the competition was not over yet, and Hao did not stay long, since the victory will still be behind him and his pet. The elf only laughed in response and said that Malt should look more objectively at things. After all, the hare will not be able to beat the record of his animal and only disgrace. Also, everyone else who did not understand why they gave them so confident in their pet. At that moment, the smiling Xuan asked the young man, did he really think that he would change the result? Zhang answered positively and called on Hao to observe what was happening. Some of the people began to diverge about their business, believing that the guy was simply disgraced. At the same time, everyone began to discuss that one day they would survive until the moment when the human faculty will surpass the elves. The teenager did not pay attention to the crowd and calmly put the hare on the test stone. Suddenly, the earth literally began to shudder. Everyone began to think that an earthquake began, but after a moment they understood. Vibration comes from the test stand. Sun suggested that the pet made it really could have an unknown force. The hare, in turn, was completely at ease and even began to stretch. Soon the result was surprised by all, since the animal was only at the first level. Everyone was finally convinced that Xiao is the only one of the human faculty who could compete with Hao. Naturally, Xuan did not miss the opportunity to laugh at this outcome, speaking that the hare did not even exceed the first 5 levels, and this was a laughingstock. The perplexed young man grabbed the pet by the ears and called him to give out a true result. In response, the cunning fox said that he simply wanted to tease these little people. All were dumbfounded by the fact that the animal is really skillfully talking. Realizing that in fact a unique beast was in front of them, the crowd was noticeably perked up, actively discussing what was happening because the phenomenon was only with the pet's pet. Soon, the students began to say that if you eat such a beast, you can increase their level. Ning suddenly asked Mei Li, did he really support Dolly because of a talkative hare? But the girl said that this was completely nothing here, and he was really unique. But Zhuan did not see anything unusual in the fact that the pet knew how to talk. Zhang, meanwhile, asked the animal to demonstrate his true level. Suddenly, the fox bit his hand, saying that he should call him Lord. The guy immediately began to dignify his king of animals, and the hare finally calmed down, after which the young man once again began to literally beg the pet to show the class. A self-confident animal said that this was not a problem and asked what level he needed. The arrogant Zhuan continued to believe in his victory and looked down at the protagonist. The young master, in turn, also believed in his victory, losing hope on the animal. The public was still skeptical of this event. Sun and Xiao were dissatisfied with the result of the hare and did not understand why the competition was still not over. Junchen was saddened by the fact that the speaker did not justify their hopes. Suddenly, the young cultivator asked his pet sitting on his shoulder, "Show the result higher than that of the elf." Thus, the hare needed to achieve the second level of the leader of the animals. A self-confident animal said that he easily achieves the necessary result. Then he rushed to the test stone with a bullet, leaving a fiery mark on Zhang's shoulder. The dumbfounded dolly immediately extinguished the fire, experiencing unpleasant sensations. At this time, the animal collapsed on the stone stand, continuing to smile at everyone around. Suddenly, a golden radiance began to come from him. Everyone froze in anticipation of the end of the dough. Initially, people did not understand what was happening and what this glow is talking about. At this moment, the hare literally ignited the powerful spiritual energy, and after a couple of seconds, the stand showed that the pet of Zhang was on the second level of the leader of the animals. All were shocked by such an unexpected result. Mai Li with Zhang, of course, were delighted. At the same time, the guy said that the hare did not even use all his forces, and Zhuan had already lost. The dumbfounded Hao finally admitted his defeat, which he was embittered and talked. However, even with such an outcome, the representative of the elven faculty still belittled his dignity, speaking that he is just a speaker, and this is not surprising. And even if it is higher than the level, this is not the main thing because, first of all, combat power is important. After that, Xuan began to argue that the hare does not have any combat abilities. The pet Zhang looked at his owner and smiled once again. Then the angry Hao ordered his combined beast to demonstrate what he was capable of, supposing that in a real battle his tiger will simply destroy this incomprehensible hare, but Sun hastened to object to him, speaking that the essence of the competition was to determine the levels of pets, and not in the battle, because this is not an arena, of course. Everyone supported Nenga and called on Xuan to recognize the defeat. Junchen also demanded that the elf stop this performance and calm down. Zhang, in turn, urged the loser to give him the essence of elven blood. Hao suddenly smiled and noticed that he simply felt his weakness, because he perfectly understands that some hare will not stand against such a beast. At the same time, he agreed to provide his blood. But at first he wanted to show the fighting skills of the pet. Subsequently, What Tiger immediately ordered to prove his magical techniques. Thus, a duel was supposed to take place between the beast of the protagonist and Xuan. The hare of a young master looked completely calm and waited for the enemy's attack. Suddenly, the tiger Hao rushed in his direction. The young cultivator immediately called on the pet to be careful. Junchen and Mei Li believed that the hare could not stand against such a strong animal. The elf, in turn, believed in the tiger and watched the battle with a smile on his face. Meanwhile, the beast Xuan got as close as possible to the Zhang's pets. The hare continued to stand still and just silently looked at his opponent. It seemed that the tiger would simply gobble up the animal and would not notice. Some even turned away so as not to see this horror. At the same time, the tiger literally sparkled with spiritual energy, which spoke of his incredible power. The extremely worried Mei Li shouted to the hare so that he did not stand in a pillar. The pet in turn said that no one dares to look down on him. After that, the animal began to behave quite strange, and everyone wondered what he was doing. But after a couple of seconds, the hare turned into a huge and ferocious lion. Everyone was in shock. Also, the pet Zhang ordered the tiger to kneel before him, and the beast Zhuan instantly froze in place. Then he really knelt. Dumbfounded elf did not understand what was happening. The hare seemed to the animal huge sizes and backed up, realizing how strong he was. Thus, the once powerful beast turned into a shy cat, from which Xuan came into rabies, and once again ordered to break into pieces of the hare. All those present at this moment literally felt the incredible power of the beast. At the same time, they began to laugh at the frightened combined elf-tiger. Soon, the true level of Dolly was displayed on the test stone. It was the destroyer of the worlds. People did not expect such power from a small bunny, not understanding how this is generally possible, and why did he not show himself to be real. Sun noted that the testing tower has long been such a result, adding that it is like a blessing of all mankind and the Academy of Immortality. The perplexed Zhuan also did not understand how the human faculty could grow such a monster. Indeed, throughout the Academy of numerous races, there were units of such animals, but they were weaker. Zhang asked Gilbert what kind of level this is, from which everything is delighted. Eberhard said that this is an incredible and extremely rare level, so people have an appropriate reaction, adding that if they still sell this hare, they will be able to provide themselves and their children for life. Naturally, Dolly was glad of such news, believing that now they will be rich. In connection with what happened, the protagonist asked Swan if he was now pleased with how, distraught with anger, answered negatively and menacingly looked at the young master. Having stated that he is not worthy to be the owner of such a unique animal, the young cultivator noted that each time he finds more and more stupid excuses, after which he once again ordered the elf to convey his essence of blood. The displeased Zhuan climbed into the inner pocket of his jacket and said that he would hold back his word, but he promised to destroy him at the competition of faculties. Then Hao still provided him with a test tube with blood. At the same time, he could not calm down and tried in every possible way to provoke Zhang. Dolly calmly took the essence, ignoring absolutely all the angry statements of the elf. But he also asked Gilbert what competition Swan was talking about. Eberhard replied that this tournament was holding the academy among all departments, where only the best of students will meet and will represent every faculty. At the same time, their human department will also choose 5 geniuses of the academy. Zhang said, in this case, this is not about him. But the fat man assured that the guy had every chance to participate. Indeed, according to the rules of the academy, not only talents, but also those who contributed to the development of the department participate in the tournament. In addition, absolutely all participants in the competition will receive rather generous awards. And since Dolly won Xuan and broke a long-term record in the test tower, he will definitely be able to take part in the competition. The fat man also noticed that there would be freshmen at the competition, so he will definitely show himself well. Then the teenager finally realized that he could not escape the fight with the elf. Suddenly, Gilbert said that the loss of blood essence for Hao is worse than shame, and as soon as they meet the next time, Xuan will clearly try to kill him. Zhang already regretted 100 times that he generally decided to check the level of his pet, but Eberhard urged him not to worry much because he can always recognize the defeat. At that moment, the young man suddenly called out to Ning. Dolly did not understand what he wanted from him. Sun, in turn, stated that although he is a bad person, but today is clearly in the role of a hero. After all, the guy brought a sick victory for the human faculty and automatically became their pride. Suddenly, people began to applaud young talent, which Zhang did not expect. The teenager was extremely grateful to him for his support and thanked the audience. Some even found the strength to ask him for forgiveness because they underestimated him. Nung asked Dolly what he was going to do on and what his plans were. The young man asked him a counter question. For how much you can sell this hair? This interest of Zhang aroused a storm of indignation at Sun, who was immediately angry. Having stated that the pride of the human faculty cannot be sold in any case, most people supported Nenga and began to say that he would throw this thought out of his head. Meili and Junshin were also unhappy with the decision of the teenager and said that a bunny could not be sold. The perplexing protagonist asked Gilbert why they react so much. Eberhard replied that the hair has too high level and is already a strategic resource of the faculty, adding that it was necessary to secretly sell it so that it would not be considered for a crime. At that moment, Junshin said extremely displeasure that Zhang had disappointed her, and even if there was no such high rank, the animal could not be sold, since he is from now on his partner. The young master was shocked by the fact that Zhang even came up with his hair, but in the end result, the young cultivator promised not to sell his pet. However, at the same time, Junshin asked what price he wanted to sell the animal at what price. The teenager thought, but could not answer the question posed. Suddenly, the girl said that she would love to buy a mulberry from him. The guy and Gilbert looked at each other, realizing that this could be another trick. In this connection, Zhang took the animal and said that this is all just a misunderstanding, and he is not going to sell such an incredible hair at all. After which the young man immediately ran away somewhere. Juncheng was in shock and did not understand why he suddenly reacted like that. After a certain time, Dolly decided to feed the pet, but the hare was extremely voracious. Having eaten a dozen portions of noodles, he demanded that the animal servant give him another plate of food. The teenager sat down to his friend and said that he had a strange feeling that he had become troubled. After all, this small fluffy was able to only eat and sleep well. Besides, it was impossible to sell it. Suddenly, Zhang quietly whispered to Eberhard that he wanted to fry him. But the fat man urged a friend to calm down and think that he was now famous for the entire academy. Moreover, the hare also became popular in the educational institution and be under close supervision. Suddenly, Gilbert lit up, and he suggested earned with the help of an animal. The surprised Dolly asked how to do it. The fat man smiled and said, "Fishing?" Zhang noticed that it was extremely dangerous, since terrible monsters are found in the sea. However, for some reason, Eberhard was sure that Tutu to cope with this difficult task. In addition, there are very few demons of the same rank in the ocean of stardust as the hare. The fat man called in every way Dolly to go hunting for sea monsters, having stated that soon they will earn a fortune with this beast, and Zhang will be able to return to their homeland to the rich. The perplexed guy asked how he could return home. After all, Gilbert himself said that their worlds are on different sides of the planet. Eberhard, in turn, smiled and said that he would definitely have to get home on a storm ship, adding that he has been wandering for many years between worlds, bringing various goods. And until the next departure of this ship, no more than 3 months remain. And since the tickets for him are very expensive, they should hurry with earnings. Naturally, the young man liked this idea, and they began to think about how to earn more money. The fat man also said that after 3 days the team goes fishing and they can join them. The next day, the protagonist, as well as the rest of the students, was summoned to the academy. The young master saw Gilbert and asked if he knew why they were called. Eberhard replied that he himself did not understand what this could be connected with. Soon they went to the audience, where half of the class was already located. Everyone, as always, looked exhausted and tired enough, which was already commonplace. After all, the cleaning class was constantly subjected to numerous physical exertion. The young cultivator, along with their friend, went deep into the audience. The fat man noticed that they collected the most lazy and mediocre students. At the same time, it was not known how the teacher was going to change this. A moment later, the teacher appeared and went to his table, greeting the students. A hum began immediately, and the teacher extremely convincingly urged everyone to silence. Then he began to talk about what awaits the students ahead for a long time and tedious. But the teacher also mentioned the upcoming competition of the faculties of the academy. After all, before the cleaning class never had to do with these events. But since Zhang won the competition of the representative of the Elven branch, Dolly was given the opportunity to take part in the tournament between the departments. Soon, the teacher asked the class who wants to be like his classmate Zhang. Everyone ignored his question, since the majority slept from fatigue. The perplexing teacher again asked, "Do he really not want to be equally energetic as he?" Students still silently looked at the teachers, dreaming of going to the hostel as soon as possible. The mentor continued to talk about how they could bring glory to their faculty, and soon, they themselves become famous for the entire Academy of Immortality. But the students had a completely different thought. At the moment, all as alone, they dreamed of just getting enough sleep. Suddenly, one of the students stated that if 2 students go from the class to the competition, the teacher will receive an increase. But since he is a teacher of the cleaning class, most likely it does not shine for him. The dissatisfied teacher once again called everyone to immediate silence. Then he said that he did not matter this increase, and he did not come here, adding that he really tries for them to finally show themselves. Suddenly, he asked Dolly whether he was proud that he would participate in the tournament. The young man got up because of the desk, as it should be, for an answer, and looked around everyone with his mysterious look. Then he asked the mentor a counter question whether it was possible to sell a place in the competition. An angry teacher instantly ordered him to sit in his place. Then he sighed heavily and silently went towards the exit, thinking about his life. After all, once he also had ambitions, and he wanted to achieve his goal. But the evil fate made him a teacher of the cleaning class, going into the discord with his dreams. After some time, the protagonist and Gilbert went on cleaning. Zhang asked how often they should get out. Eberhard replied that this usually happens once a month, because in the end, this is also a development. Because the environment should not be contaminated, Dolly absolutely agreed with it. Suddenly, the young master recalled his parents who forced him to clean up every day. Noticing that the young cultivator without a mood, the fat man decided to cheer him up, having said that at least their cleaning class is considered a dirty and extremely tiring business. But in fact, this has its advantages. At that moment, Gilbert smiled. The perplexing Zhang asked his friend what exactly he was talking about. The fat man urged him to follow him so that he showed everything to him clearly. But suddenly they were stopped by the guards who said that they could not get into the dean's office now. Eberhard, in turn, said that they were obliged to clean and showed them a mop. Then they were missed, but demanded that they be extremely careful. Going inside the room, Gilbert said that all the teachers of the academy work here, and it was in this cleaning zone that he tried so hard to get, which the fat man said. Zhang asked what the benefit to remove in this mysterious and at first glance an elite place. Eberhard noted that not only teachers work here, but also the dean's office, and usually many interesting objects are stored here. Among them, there is even gold and silver. Adding that they penetrated here under the guise of cleaning, The fat man immediately broke into a malicious smile. The guy looked at him and said that he had caught his thoughts and ran up the steps. Gilbert naturally followed him to show how everything was arranged here. Having entered the kitchen of the teachers, they gave it an incredibly tasty smell. Eberhard said that it was in this laboratory that teachers conduct their research, having shown on shelves with various ingredients. The fat man also noticed that there is a lot of valuable things, and the use of many of these products can directly increase their level of development. Then the fat man went to the table and showed some pills that the dean himself prepared. Gilbert threw one in his mouth and added that such pills could not be bought anywhere.